If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Michael Thornton. I've been a park ranger in these Appalachian Mountains for almost 20 years now. Nothing much surprises me anymore, or at least that's what I thought until last autumn. It was a perfect October evening. I was up in my lookout tower watching the sun set over the valley. The light was golden, filtering through the red and orange leaves. Days like these were why I became a ranger in the first place. Just me, the mountains, and that peaceful feeling you get when everything is right with the world. I remember taking a deep breath, smelling the pine and that special earthy scent that only comes in fall. I had my coffee mug in one hand and my binoculars in the other, scanning the forest below like I always did before darkness fell. That's when I first noticed something wasn't right. The birds stopped singing. All at once, like someone had flipped a switch. You know how forests are, they're never truly quiet. There's always birds calling, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling. But suddenly, there was nothing. Just this heavy silence that felt like it was pressing down on my ears. I told myself it was nothing. Probably just a storm coming. Animals can sense that kind of thing long before we can. I checked the sky, but it was clear. Not a cloud in sight. Still, I brushed it off. Weather in the mountains can change fast. My radio crackled to life. Startling. Me in the silence. Tower 3, this is base. You copy? It was Jenkins from the main station. I picked up the radio. This is Tower 3. What's up, Jenkins? Getting some weird calls from folks near Point Pleasant. They're seeing strange red lights in the sky. Thought it might be a fire, but doesn't look like it. Probably just some kids with flares or something. Or UFOs, I joked. You know how people get, Jenkins laughed. Yeah, well, keep an eye out anyway. Let me know if you see anything odd. I didn't think much of it then. People see things all the time in these woods. Their imaginations run wild, especially when it gets dark. The next morning, I was out on my usual patrol when I found it. A deer carcass like none I'd ever seen before. I've seen plenty of animal kills in my time. Wolf, bear, mountain lion, they all leave their marks in different ways. But this was something else. The cuts were clean, too clean, like it had been done with surgical tools. And there wasn't a drop of blood anywhere. Not on the ground, not on the deer. It was completely drained. My skin crawled as I knelt beside it. 20 years in these woods, and I'd never seen anything like this. I took some photos and samples too, sent to the wildlife department. They'd probably say it was poachers using new techniques or something, but deep down, I knew better. No poacher works like this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that deer and the unnatural silence. In the forest, I got up and went through some old files we keep at the tower, records going back decades. Rangers before me had kept pretty good notes about unusual happenings. That's when I found it, a worn leather journal from 1934. The handwriting was faded, but I could still make it out. A ranger named Sullivan had documented similar things. Mutilated animals, strange silence in the woods, and something he called the red-eyed watcher. As I read his entries, my heart pounded harder with each page. Sullivan wrote about seeing a tall figure with wings and glowing red eyes standing at the edge of the forest. He described finding animals cut open with precision, and he talked about the silence, that same unnatural quiet I'd experienced. The last entry was dated November 12th, 1934. All it said was, "It's watching me. God help us all." I closed the journal and put it aside, telling myself it was just the ramblings of a lonely ranger who'd spent too much time in the woods. But as I climbed back into bed and turned off the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there in the darkness was watching me too, and I was right. That night, the nightmares began. I was standing in my lookout tower, just like any normal day. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. But something felt wrong. I looked down at the forest below, and that's when I saw it. A tall, dark shape, moving between the trees, not like a person walks, but gliding, as if its feet never touched the ground. I blinked, and suddenly it was in my tower with me. A massive figure, taller than any man, with huge wings folded behind its back. Its face, if you could call it that, had no features except for two glowing red eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Just a dream, I told myself. Just a dream. But the next morning, Dave Davis, the other ranger on duty, came to my cabin with a strange look on his face. "Mike," he said, "you might want to come see this." I followed him outside to the base of my lookout tower. There, pressed into the soft earth, were footprints, but not like any I'd ever seen before. They were huge, twice the size of my boot, and shaped all wrong. Not quite animal, not quite human. "What do you think made these?" Dave asked, his voice low. I shook my head. No idea. Maybe a bear with deformed paws. Even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. "Bears don't leave prints like this. They go all the way around your tower," Dave said, like something was circling it, watching. I felt cold despite the morning sun. The word from that old journal, "watcher," echoed in my head. We tried to make plaster casts of the prints, but they were too shallow to get a good impression. By afternoon, a light rain had washed them away completely, almost like they'd never been there at all. 3 days later, Marcus Holloway didn't come home from his hunting trip. Marcus was a local guy, been hunting these woods since he was a kid. He knew them as well as I did, maybe better. I joined the search party. We spent hours combing the forest, calling his name until our voices were hoarse. Just when we were about to call it quits for the day, one of the volunteers radioed in. They'd found him. I wish they hadn't. Marcus was lying in a small clearing. His eyes were gone, not gouged out messily like an animal would do, but removed clean, like in surgery. On his chest, strange symbols had been carved into the skin. They didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. The medical examiner couldn't explain it. No animal tracks nearby, no signs of a struggle. It was like he'd just laid down and let someone or something do this to him. That night, as I sat in my cabin with the doors locked and my rifle across my lap, the radio beside me suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, I heard voices, whispers talking about a bridge collapsing and people drowning. I tried to respond, to ask who was speaking, but the voices just kept whispering, talking about events that hadn't happened yet. Then the radio went dead. The next day, the power at the ranger station kept flickering on and off. I was going through some old newspaper clippings I'd found, looking for anything similar to what was happening now. Every time I found something, an article about unexplained deaths from the 1980s, another about strange lights in the sky from the 1930s, the lights would dim, and then the bulb above me exploded in a shower of glass. It was trying to stop me from learning more. I was sure of it. That evening, as the sun was setting, I saw it for the first time. Not in a dream, but for real. I was looking out my cabin window, and there it was, a tall, dark shape with what looked like wings, standing between two trees at the edge of the forest. It was only there for a second before it disappeared, like a shadow melting into the darkness, but I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it was watching me. The next day, another hunter went missing, Alan Bryce. He'd gone out to check his traps and never came back. We organized another search party, but all we found was his rifle. It was bent completely in half, like it had been crushed by something impossibly strong. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. I needed answers, so I drove to the community college in Point Pleasant to talk to Professor Hamilton. He taught folklore and local history, and if anyone would know something about what was happening, it would be him. I showed him the journal, told him about the footprints, the deaths, everything. I expected him to think I was crazy, but he just nodded slowly, like he'd heard it all before. "There are things in this world that exist outside our understanding," he said quietly. "Entities that move between dimensions, that feed on fear and tragedy. They're drawn to places where disaster is about to strike. You're saying this thing, whatever it is, it's here because something bad is going to happen?" I asked. Hamilton looked at me with sad eyes. "I'm saying, Ranger Thornton, that it might already be too late to stop it. As I drove back to my cabin that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every time I checked my rear-view mirror, the road behind me was empty, but the feeling remained, like a pair of eyes boring into the back of my skull. Something was out there in the darkness, and it was getting closer. The phone calls started 3 nights later. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., my phone would ring, jolting me from restless sleep. When I answered, there was no voice, just static and a sound that made my skin crawl. The slow, heavy beating of massive wings, like something huge was taking flight. After the 3rd night, I unplugged my phone. But at 3:17 a.m., it rang anyway. Stopped sleeping much after that. Just dozed in my chair, with my rifle across my lap, jumping at every little sound from the forest. Dave was getting worried about me. I could see it in his eyes when he came by to check on me. He thought I was cracking under the stress. Maybe I was. But then he found the cocoons. He'd been doing a routine patrol along the eastern ridge when he spotted something strange hanging from the trees. Large grayish-white sacks that looked like some kind of insect cocoon, but way too big. The biggest was about the size of a man. When Dave cut one open, he threw up right there on the spot. Inside was what looked like partially digested human remains. Not whole bodies, just parts, like something had been feeding on them and storing. The leftovers. The sheriff's department came out, took samples, asked questions. They thought it might be some kind of serial killer using the forest to hide his victims. I knew better, but kept my mouth shut. Who would believe me? That night, a storm rolled in. Lightning flashing across the sky, rain coming down so hard, it sounded like someone throwing handfuls of pebbles against my roof. I was sitting by the window, watching the storm, when a flash of lightning lit up the yard. And there it was. Standing in my yard, completely still despite the pouring rain, was a figure about 7 feet tall. It had the shape of a man, but with massive wings folded behind its back. Its skin was dark and seemed to absorb the light around it. But its eyes, 2 glowing red orbs, pierced through the darkness and stared straight at me. I grabbed my camera and took a picture before I could think better of it. The flash went off, and when I looked back outside, the creature was gone. When I developed the photo the next day, all that showed was a blurry black mass where the creature had been standing. But the strangest thing was when I took a second look at the roll of film. The thing seemed to be in a slightly different position in each frame, like it had moved between shots, even though I'd only pressed the shutter once. The following week, reports started coming in from all over the county, farmers finding their livestock dead in the fields. Cows, sheep, even a couple of horses, all of them with their organs removed, but with no visible cuts or incisions on the bodies, like something had taken what it wanted without breaking the skin. The local paper called it the West Virginia cattle mutilator. Some blamed it on satanic cults, others said it was aliens. I kept quiet about what I knew, but the creature wasn't keeping quiet about itself anymore. I started seeing it everywhere, in the bathroom mirror when I was brushing my teeth, in the reflection of my coffee cup, in the windows of my truck. Just brief glimpses, there and gone so fast I could almost convince myself I was imagining it. Almost. It never approached me, never tried to communicate. It just watched. Always watched. After 2 weeks of this, I noticed my hair in the sink when I was shaving. Clumps of grey hair. My hair had been brown my whole life, not a single grey strand. But that morning, as I looked in the mirror, I saw that whole patches had turned stark white overnight. That same day, the science department at the university called the ranger station. Their seismographs had been picking up strange vibrations in the earth beneath the forest. Regular pulses every 57 minutes exactly, too regular to be natural. Dave went out to check the eastern ridge again. He'd been quiet lately, jumpy. When he came back that evening, he was pale as a ghost. "I found something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some kind of old rock carvings, hidden in a small cave." He showed me the pictures he'd taken, ancient petroglyphs etched into the stone wall of the cave. They showed a winged figure standing among piles of what looked like bodies. All the bodies were missing their eyes. "How old do you think they are?" I asked. "The anthropology professor said they could be thousands of years old," Dave replied. "Mike, whatever this thing is, it's been here a long time." The next day, a group of hikers was found wandering along the highway near the forest entrance. 3 college kids who'd gone camping for the weekend. When the sheriff's deputies found them, they were walking in a straight line, hand in hand, their eyes clouded over white like they had cataracts. They couldn't say what had happened to them. They just kept muttering the same phrase over and over. "The prophecy of the moth, the prophecy of the moth." They were taken to the hospital in Point Pleasant. The doctors couldn't explain what had happened to their eyes or their minds. They seemed physically fine, just changed somehow. I visited them that evening. They sat in their hospital beds, staring at nothing with those milky white eyes. But when I walked in, they all turned their heads toward me at the exact same time, like they could sense me even though they couldn't see. "He knows you," one of them said, her voice flat. "He's marked you." "Who?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "The moth," they said in unison. "He watches, he waits, he warns." "Warns about what?" I pressed. The girl smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was like something else was using her face. "Death," she said. "He always comes before the dying starts." A chill ran down my spine as I finally began to understand what was happening. I rushed back to the ranger station and started pulling out all the records I could find about the creature. Newspaper clippings, old ranger logs, local history books. And there it was, the pattern I'd been missing. Every time there had been sightings of the creature throughout history. 1934, 1891, 1852, a disaster had followed. A mine collapse that killed 73 men. A flash flood that wiped out half a town. A church fire during a Christmas service. The Mothman, as the locals had started calling it, didn't cause these tragedies. It appeared because they were going to happen. It was trying to warn us. Once I realized what the Mothman was trying to do, I started paying closer attention to the signs. It wasn't just appearing randomly. It was leaving clues. Every morning, I'd find strange patterns of broken branches in the forest. At first, I thought it was just storm damage, but after the 3rd day, I noticed they all pointed in the same direction, toward Silver Ridge Bridge, the big suspension bridge that connected our county to the next one over. The bridge was almost near 50 years old. There had been talk about replacing it for years, but the county never had the money. In 2 weeks, they were planning a big celebration for the bridge's anniversary. A parade, a fair. The whole town would be there. And the Mothman kept pointing to it. I tried to tell Dave about my theory, but he'd changed. He barely talked anymore, and when he did, his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He'd lost weight and dark circles had formed under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. "I've seen it too," he finally admitted one evening. "Not just glimpses. It came to my house last night. Stood outside my bedroom window for hours, just watching." "Did it try to communicate?" I asked. Dave shook his head. No, but I understand anyway. He tapped his temple. It's in here now, showing me things. Before I could ask what he meant, my watch stopped. I glanced down at it, 3:17 p.m. When I looked back up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in broad daylight, standing at the edge of the tree line, was the Mothman. It had never appeared during the day before. Its wings were partially open, and those red eyes glowed even in the sunlight. It raised one long, thin arm and pointed directly at me. Then it was gone. Dave saw it too. His face went white, and he started backing away from me. It's coming soon, he whispered. Whatever it's warning about, there's no stopping it now. The next morning, Dave didn't show up for work. I drove to his cabin to check on him, knocking on his door with growing dread in my stomach. When there was no answer, I used my spare key to get in. The smell hit me first, metallic and wrong. Dave was hanging from the ceiling fan in his living room. On the table beneath him was a note, the same phrase written over and over in jagged, desperate handwriting. It showed me what's coming. It showed me what's coming. It showed me what's coming. I called the sheriff, went through all the motions you're supposed to go through when you find your friend dead. But my mind was somewhere else, trying to piece together what Dave had seen that was so terrible. It drove him to this. I decided I had to get out of there, just for a day or two, clear my head. I threw some clothes in a bag and got in my truck, planning to drive to my sister's place a few counties over. I made it about 10 miles before my engine suddenly died. The truck rolled to a stop in the middle of the empty road. When I tried to restart it, nothing happened, not even a click, and then I saw it, standing in the middle of the road ahead of me, the Mothman. It slowly spread its massive wings until they stretched from one side of the road to the other, blocking my path completely. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, me through the windshield, it with those glowing red eyes. Then it tilted its head like it was curious about what I would do next. My radio turned on by itself, static hissing through the speakers, and then, through the static, I heard Dave's voice. "Mike, you have to warn them. The bridge, Mike. Warn them about the bridge." It wasn't really Dave, I knew that. The creature was using his voice somehow to try to make me understand. "What about the bridge?" I said aloud, not even sure if it could hear me. The radio crackled. "Warn them, save them." The Mothman folded its wings and took a step toward my truck. I wanted to run, to get out and sprint in the other direction, but I couldn't move. Those red eyes held me in place. It raised its arm again and pointed back the way I had come. Back toward town, back toward the bridge. My engine suddenly roared to life by itself. When I looked back at the road, the creature was gone. I turned around and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Williams had known me for 20 years. If anyone would listen to me, it would be him. But as I tried to explain what I'd seen, what I'd figured out, I watched his expression change from concern to disbelief to something close to pity. "Mike," he said when I finally ran out of words, "you need to take some time off. Dave's death hit you hard, I get that. But this talk about moth creatures and bridge disasters, it's not healthy." "I'm not making this up," I insisted. "Look at the pattern. Look at the records. This thing appears before tragedies. It's trying to warn us about the bridge." Williams sighed. "The bridge was inspected last month. It's perfectly safe." "Then explain the dead animals. Explain Marcus Holloway and Alan Bryce. Explain those hikers with the white eyes." "We're investigating all those incidents," he said firmly. "But I won't have you causing a panic over some local superstition." No matter what I said, he wouldn't believe me. Nobody would. They all thought I was stressed, traumatized by finding Dave. Maybe I was, but that didn't mean I was wrong. Over. The next few days, strange things started happening all over town. The weather shifted dramatically. Unseasonal storms, sudden temperature drops. Electrical systems went haywire. Traffic lights changing at random. TV signals cutting out. Car alarms going off for no reason, and the Mothman sightings increased. Not just me anymore. Dozens of people reported seeing a tall, winged figure with red eyes, always at dusk, always watching from a distance. I kept digging, looking for something, anything that would convince people to take the threat seriously. I found old engineering reports that mentioned structural concerns about the Silver Ridge Bridge, small cracks in the support columns, rust in the cable housings. Nothing major, but together they painted a worrying picture. 3 days before the bridge celebration, I was arrested. Disturbing the peace, they said, after I stood outside the town hall with a sign warning people to stay away from the bridge. Sheriff Williams locked me up himself, saying it was for my own good, to give me time to calm down. From my cell window, I could see a slice of sky and the tops of the trees in the distance. As the sun set on my first night behind bars, I saw the Mothman perched on the highest branch of an old oak, its wings spread wide, watching the town below. Then it turned its head and looked directly at me. Even from that distance, I could feel those red eyes boring into mine, and then it did something new. It held up what looked like papers, unfolding them in its long fingers. Though I couldn't possibly see the details from so far away, somehow I knew exactly what they were. Blueprints of the bridge, with all its weaknesses marked in red. I pounded on my cell door, screaming for someone to listen. The night deputy came running, probably thinking I was having some kind of breakdown. "Please," I begged him, "call the county engineer. Have them check the bridge supports. Something's wrong with them. Something's going to happen." He just shook his head and walked away. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw visions of the bridge shaking, support cables snapping, cars plunging into the icy river below. I couldn't tell if they were nightmares or if the Mothman was somehow putting these images in my head. Either way, I knew what was coming, and I was the only one who could stop it. I spent 2 days in that cell, begging anyone who would listen to check the bridge. The deputies started avoiding my cell entirely. They thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but on the morning of the 3rd day, something changed. The cell door opened, and there stood Deputy Collins, looking uncomfortable. "You're free to go," he said, not meeting my eyes. "What? Why?" I asked, suspicious. "Sheriff says the 48-hour hold is up. You haven't been charged with anything." As he walked me to the front desk to collect my belongings, I noticed he kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. "What is it, Collins?" I finally asked. He hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "My kid brother was fishing under the bridge yesterday. Said he heard strange noises, like metal groaning." My heart skipped a beat. "Did he tell anyone?" Collins nodded. "Called the highway department. They sent someone out to look, but they said everything was fine." He paused. "But Bobby swears he saw something, standing on top of the bridge tower. Something with wings." I grabbed his arm. "Collins, you have to help me. Today's the celebration. There'll be hundreds of people on that bridge." "What do you expect me to do? Sheriff would have my badge if I started telling people to stay away." "Just help me block the entrance," I pleaded, "just long enough to get someone to really check the structure. Please." I could see him wrestling with the decision. Finally, he sighed. "Meet me at the north end of the bridge in an hour. I can't promise anything, but I'll listen." As I walked out of the station, I could feel eyes on me. Not human eyes. I looked up at the roof of the building across the street, and there it was, the Mothman, perched like a gargoyle, watching me. But now, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I understood now. It had been trying to help all along. I nodded. To it, a silent acknowledgement. It tilted its head, those red eyes glowing even in the morning light. By the time I reached the north end of the bridge an hour later, people were already gathering for the celebration. Families with kids, elderly couples, teenagers, everyone was coming out for the anniversary fair. They had no idea they were walking into danger. I spotted Collins's patrol car parked near the bridge entrance. He was leaning against it, looking nervous. "I can't officially block the bridge," he said as I approached, "but I can slow things down, check IDs, that kind of thing. Buy you some time." "Time for what?" I asked. "To find evidence. Something concrete I can take to the sheriff. Otherwise, this is just going to look like the desperate actions of a crazy man." He was right. I needed proof. That's when I saw it, the Mothman, standing on the highest point of the bridge, its wings spread wide. And this time, I wasn't the only one who saw it. People were pointing, children crying. Some pulled out their phones to take pictures. "Do you see it?" I asked Collins. His face had gone pale. "What the hell is that thing?" Before I could answer, a loud crack echoed across the water. The sound of metal under stress. Collins grabbed his radio. "This is Deputy Collins at Silver Ridge Bridge. We need to evacuate immediately. Possible structural failure." But it was already starting to happen. The bridge gave another groan, louder this time. People began to scream, running in both directions. Collins jumped into action, directing traffic away from the bridge, using his car to block new vehicles from entering. I ran to help, waving people back toward land. Most were already fleeing in panic after seeing the Mothman and hearing the bridge's ominous sounds. But then I heard tires screeching. A pickup truck was trying to drive around Collins's blockade. It sideswiped the patrol car, sending it lurching forward onto the bridge approach. Collins was caught between them, trying to jump clear. The truck and patrol car, now locked together, slid onto the bridge. Collins was hanging onto the side of his cruiser, trying to get the door open. Without thinking, I ran after them. The bridge was shaking now. Small vibrations I could feel through my boots. I was about 20 feet onto the bridge when the Mothman appeared directly in front of me, blocking my path. Its wings spread wide, those red eyes pulsing with an urgent light. "Get out of my way," I shouted. "I have to help him." The creature didn't move. Behind it, I could see Collins finally getting free of the cruiser, limping toward land. Then came a sound I'll never forget. The scream of metal cables snapping. One of the main support cables whipped free, slicing through the air like a giant steel snake. The Mothman moved with incredible speed. It grabbed me, wrapping those massive wings around my body. I fought against it, trying to break free, to run toward Collins and the others still on the bridge. Then the section of road where I had been standing collapsed. If the Mothman hadn't pulled me back, I would have fallen with it. I watched in horror as the center section of the bridge gave way. The patrol car and pickup truck slid into the growing gap, plunging into the river below. Other vehicles too, the ones that hadn't made it off in time. The Mothman released me and I fell to my knees on the stable part of the road. All around was chaos, people screaming, emergency sirens wailing in the distance. The creature stepped back, those red eyes fixed on mine. There was no malice there, no evil, just a deep, ancient awareness. It had done what it came to do, warn us, save as many as it could. Then it spread its wings and rose into the air, hovering for a moment before disappearing into the sky. My name is Catherine Walsh. I used to be a wildlife biologist before I became a park ranger here in White Mountain National Forest. Most days, I love my job. The crisp October air, the beautiful red and orange leaves, the peaceful quiet. But today isn't most days. I'm hunched over some strange tracks at the edge of Whispering Pines campground, and something isn't right. These look like wolf prints, but wolves haven't been spotted in this part of New Hampshire for decades. And these tracks, they show signs of walking on two legs, not four. The claw marks are unusually deep too, like whatever made them is heavier than a normal wolf. I take photos and make some plaster casts of the best prints. The weird thing is how these tracks circle the campground. They don't cross through it, like an animal just passing by. They go all around it, like whatever made them was checking the place out. When I show the tracks to my boss, Senior Ranger Gregory Thompson, he just laughs. "Katie, you're overthinking this," he says, not even bothering to look closely at my casts. "Probably just some coyotes. That biology degree of yours has you seeing mysteries where there aren't any." I bite my tongue. Thompson's a good ranger, but he's old school. He doesn't like being told things by someone with less field experience, especially a woman with a doctorate. But I know what coyote tracks look like. These are different. Later that afternoon, a local hunter named Malcolm Pierce comes into the station. He's all worked up about something. "I heard them last night," he says, his hands shaking as he accepts a cup of coffee from me. "Near my deer stand in the north section." "Heard what, Mr. Pierce?" I ask. "Voices, but not human voices, like growls, but they were talking to each other." He looks at me with wide eyes. "Then I heard them walking, on 2 feet, several of them, moving together through the woods." Thompson rolls his eyes behind the hunter's back, but I feel a chill run down my spine. After Pierce leaves, I dig through some of the historical records we keep at the station. In an old box marked Historical Archives, I find logging camp journals from 1879. What I read makes my mouth go dry. "The wolfmen hunt in packs," one logger wrote. "They take their kills and strip them like skilled butchers. 3 men gone missing last week. Found Jenkins yesterday. What was left of him?" I'm still reading when Thompson walks in with bad news. 3 hikers haven't checked in on schedule. They were last seen heading toward an area locals call the Hollows, a dense part of the forest with strange rock formations that most locals avoid. "We'll start a search first thing tomorrow," Thompson says, "but they probably just lost track of time or their radio died." I nod, but I don't believe it. Not with those tracks I found. That night I can't sleep. I go back to check on the wildlife cameras I set up last week for our regular animal population survey. Most of them are fine, showing the usual deer, squirrels, and occasional bear. Then I find camera number 7. The memory card is almost full, which is strange. I download the footage and my heart nearly stops. The video is blurry, but it clearly shows a large figure, at least 7 feet tall, standing on 2 legs. It's shaped like a wolf, but moves like a person. The creature stares directly at the camera, then deliberately reaches out and turns it slightly, not destroying it but adjusting its angle. Then it walks away on 2 legs. The audio is the most disturbing part. Howls echo through the forest, but not normal wolf howls. These have patterns, pauses, responses. With my linguistics minor, I recognize what I'm hearing. Syntax structures, language. These aren't just wolves. They're communicating, thinking, planning, and now 3 hikers are missing in their territory. I play the recording again, listening to those structured howls carrying through the dark forest. Whatever these creatures are, they're intelligent. And based on those old journals and the way they're circling our campgrounds, they're hunting. I grab my phone to call Thompson. The search tomorrow just became a lot more urgent and a lot more dangerous. The next morning, I wake up before my alarm. The images from that camera kept me tossing and turning all night. Thompson agreed to start the search early after I showed him the footage, though he still thinks it's just a bear walking funny or someone in a costume playing pranks. Our search team is small, just me, Thompson, and 2 other rangers named Martinez and Chen. The morning fog hangs heavy between the trees as we head toward the missing hiker's last known location. "Stick together," Thompson says as we enter the hollows. "These rock formations can mess with your sense of direction." He's right. Tall stone columns rise up from the forest floor like giant fingers, creating weird shadows and echoes. The fall leaves crunch under our boots, sounding too loud in the quiet forest. After 3 hours of searching, we find their campsite. My stomach drops as soon as I see it. The tent is still there, but it's all wrong. It's not ripped apart like a bear attack. The fabric is cut, clean, straight lines like someone used a knife. But there are no knife marks on the support poles. Whatever did this was precise. "Look at this," I call to Thompson, pointing to the scattered supplies. Their backpacks are torn open, food containers emptied. I pick up a plastic water bottle and feel my skin go cold. There are bite marks on it, teeth impressions that show both human-like patterns and wolf-like canines in the same jaw. Thompson's face goes pale when I show him. He doesn't have a smart comment this time. "Over here," calls Martinez from the edge of the clearing. What he found makes my heart pound even harder. A human hand, severed at the wrist, still clutching a camera. The fingers are stiff, but haven't started decomposing yet. This happened recently. Chen carefully removes the memory card while Thompson radios for backup. I pull on gloves and examine the cut on the wrist. It's clean, too clean for an animal attack. Back at our base camp, we look at the one photo on the camera. It shows the hiker's tent at night, surrounded by a half circle of glowing eyes reflecting the camera flash. Not random eyes scattered through the woods, but deliberately arranged, all at the same height, all watching. That night I sit outside my tent, recording the howls echoing across the valley. They're coming from multiple directions, call and response patterns moving around us. No normal wolves communicate like this. It's almost like they're talking to each other about us. The next morning, Joseph Running Creek, a local tracker whose family has lived in these mountains for generations, comes to our camp. Thompson asked him to join the search, but he refuses to go near the hollows. "The dog people have claimed that place," he says quietly, stirring his coffee. "They mark their hunting grounds every 17 years, always in the fall when the woods fill with hunters." "Dog people?" I ask. "That's what my grandfather called them. They defend their territory, but not like animals. They plan, they think." He looks at me with serious eyes. "I tracked a deer once that was taken by them. They had field-dressed it, perfect, like a hunter would." After he leaves, I search through old newspapers at the ranger station. What I find confirms what Joseph said. Disappearances happening in 17-year cycles, always during hunting season. The last cluster was in 2007, before that 1990, then 1973. All the way back to the logging camp journals I found. Our search continues the next day. That's when we find the second hiker. I've seen animal attacks before. This isn't one. The body is hanging from a tree branch, expertly field-dressed like a hunter would do to a deer. The organs are removed and arranged on the ground below in a pattern that makes no sense to me but looks deliberate. It's pointing to something. I follow the direction and spot a cave entrance, not marked on any of our maps. Around the body, the ground tells a story that makes no sense. There are massive wolf prints alongside bare human footprints. Sometimes they merge, showing half-human, half-wolf impressions, as if something is changing as it walks. That evening, we send up thermal imaging drones to search the area. On the screens, we watch as multiple large heat signatures move through the forest. They're walking upright, keeping perfect distance from each other like soldiers on patrol. Sometimes they stop and communicate, then change formation. They're not just animals, they're hunting us as a team, and we have no idea what we're really dealing with. We're back at our base camp, trying to make sense of what we've found, when our radios crackle. "Movement at the perimeter, south side," Chen's voice shouts. We rush out to find the third missing hiker stumbling toward our camp. His clothes are torn and bloody, his face pale as a ghost. Before we can reach him, his legs give out and he collapses to the ground. "They're learning from watching us," he mumbles, as Thompson and I carry him to the medical tent. "They watch everything we do." Martinez, who used to be a paramedic, checks him over. The hiker has deep cuts on the backs of his legs, precise cuts that hit exactly where the hamstring muscles are. Not random claw marks, but careful slices that would make it impossible to run fast. "What happened out there?" I asked gently, holding a cup of water to his lips. "We were setting up camp when I felt watched." he whispers. His eyes keep darting to the trees outside our camp. At first we saw nothing. Then we noticed them, standing, perfectly still at the edge of the trees, just watching. He takes a shaky breath. They would copy us. If Jeff waved his arms to scare them off, one would wave back. When Maria checked her compass, one tilted its head like it was studying what she was doing. The hiker grabs my arm suddenly. They stood like that for hours, just watching us. Then at night they came. They knew exactly where we kept the knife, the flashlights. They knew which tent was which, like they'd been studying us the whole time. He doesn't last the night. Blood loss and shock take him around 2 a.m. His last words are garbled, something about they're not animals and they know what they're doing. With the sun up, Thompson decides we need to look for this research station the dying hiker mentioned. We follow clues from the thermal imaging and tracks, moving deeper into the forest than any of our maps show. 6 hours later, we find it, an old wooden cabin, half collapsed and hidden by thick vines. Inside, the air smells musty and wild. What we find makes my blood run cold. The walls are covered with papers, decades of observation notes on human hunting techniques. There are drawings of rifle parts, detailed studies of hunting blinds, and notes on how humans track animals. Look at this, Martinez calls, holding up a stack of papers with shaking hands. They're drawings, detailed sketches of human muscles and organs. Next to them are what look like butchering diagrams, with handwritten notes in strange symbols that almost look like a mix of claw marks and letters. These creatures aren't just predators, I say, my mouth dry. They're studying us, learning how we hunt so they can hunt us better. That night we double the security at our base camp. Motion sensors, tripwires with bells, the works. Everyone is on edge after what we found at the cabin. Around midnight, Martinez notices something wrong. The perimeter alarms have stopped sending signals, not because they were triggered, but because something cut them somehow. Whatever did, it knew exactly how our alarm system worked. In the distance, howls echo through the trees. I pull out my recorder and listen carefully to the patterns. What I hear sends shivers down my spine. They're sharing coordinates, I tell Thompson, pointing. Do my map. Listen to the pattern. 3 short howls, pause, 2 long howls. That section repeats, but with slight variations. They're communicating our positions to each other. Thompson looks skeptical until Martinez's radio picks up something disturbing. Guttural breathing sounds and what might be words, but distorted and backward, like someone learning to speak by listening to recordings. As dawn approaches, a thick fog rolls in, unnaturally fast, limiting visibility to just a few feet. We tie ropes between us to stay together, but somehow Chen gets separated. Despite being only 10 feet away, the fog plays tricks with sound. Voices seem to come from all directions. Through breaks in the mist, I catch glimpses of tall, wolf-like shadows moving on 2 legs. They're using hand signals to communicate. Signals that look disturbingly similar to the ones our own search team uses. They're using military-style formations, whispers Thompson, his earlier skepticism completely gone. Look how they're moving. That's a standard search pattern. The creatures are learning from us, watching our every move. And now they've surrounded our team in this fog. We're not the hunters here, we're the prey. The fog is still thick when we hear Thompson's Jeep start up. He had parked it about 50 yards from our camp as a backup escape option. Thompson? Martinez calls into the radio. You at the vehicle? Static crackles. Then Thompson's voice comes through. Negative. Still with you. Something's... A loud thud cuts him off. The sound of something heavy landing on metal. Through the radio, we hear glass breaking. Thompson! I shout into my handset. Gregory, come in! Nothing but static. Martinez, Chen and I move carefully toward where we parked the Jeep. The fog makes it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. We stay close, our backs to each other. We find Thompson's ranger hat first. It's placed perfectly in the center of a small clearing, like someone put it there on purpose. His radio lies nearby, still on, still broadcasting, and then we hear it wet, tearing sounds, chewing. The unmistakable noises of something being eaten. Thompson's screams come through the radio, along with snarling sounds. He's still alive, somewhere being consumed. The sounds are so clear that we realize with horror they're not coming from Thompson. They're coming from his radio. Something is holding it up to him as he's being killed. "We need to go," Chen whispers, his face white with shock. "Now!" We back away slowly. That's when the radio crackles again. "Help me," Thompson's voice calls. "I'm hurt. Need assistance." It sounds like him, but something's off in the rhythm. "Please come help." By the big rock. Chen reaches for his gun, but I grab his arm and shake my head. "That's not Thompson, not anymore." We retreat to what's left of our camp and grab only essential gear. As we're preparing to move out, Martinez notices something disturbing on the satellite map. "Look at our search patterns from yesterday," he says, pointing to the GPS tracks we've been recording. "Now look at where we keep finding signs of the creatures." I see it immediately. We've been using standard search grid patterns, and the dogmen are setting up along the edges of those grids. They're using our own search method to predict where we'll go next. "They're herding us," I whisper, "like sheep." Night falls as we try to make our way back toward the ranger station. Without Thompson's jeep, we're on foot through dense forest. We use night vision goggles to watch for movement. What we see stops us cold. The creatures, the dogmen, are using tools. Not simple sticks, but complex traps, snares made from braided plant fibers, weighted nets hung in the trees, even trip lines connected to spear traps, all sized perfectly for human proportions. Through the night vision, I spot what must be their leader, a massive dogman standing over 8 feet tall, directing the others with complex hand signals and facial expressions. The intelligence in its movements is unmistakable. "Look how they disabled the jeep," Chen whispers, pointing to fresh tracks near a fallen tree. The creatures had watched Thompson perform maintenance on the vehicle that morning. Now they've copied his actions, removing the same parts he had checked. Crippling our escape route, as we move through the darkness, we find more disturbing signs of their intelligence. Near a small cave, we discover preserved human organs, mostly brain tissue, stored in naturally cold rock chambers. Why they're collecting them, I can't begin to guess. They're picking us off in a specific order, Martinez realizes as we check our maps again. First, they took the hikers, the easiest targets, then Thompson, our leader. They understand our social structure. By sunrise, we're exhausted and terrified. We've been on the move all night, trying to stay ahead of the pack. But as the morning light filters through the trees, we see them, shadowy figures positioned just inside the tree line, surrounding us. We count at least 12, standing perfectly still, watching our every move. They're learning from us in real time. Every tactic we try, they counter within minutes. Somehow they're sharing information across miles of forest almost instantly. The howling, I realize. It's not just coordinates. They're describing our behaviors to each other. The three of us huddle together, backs against a large boulder. We've been herded here, I'm sure of it. They've been pushing us in this direction all night. The extraction point is 2 miles east, Chen says, checking the map. If we can make it there, the backup team should be waiting with a helicopter. Martinez nods grimly. They'll be expecting that. They know where we're headed. I look at the dogmen watching us from the trees. They haven't attacked yet. They're waiting for something. They're not just predators, I say quietly. They're strategists. And right now, we're exactly where they want us to be. The sun rises higher as we sit trapped against the boulder. The dogmen haven't moved. They just watch us, their eyes reflecting the morning light. We need to make a run for it, Martinez whispers. The extraction point isn't far. Chen nods, but I notice something odd. The largest dogman, the alpha, has stepped forward from the tree line. It's the first time one has approached us in daylight. The creature stands fully upright, at least 8 feet tall. Its body is covered in thick, dark fur, but its posture is almost human. Its eyes are what disturb me most, amber-colored with an intelligence that feels ancient and calculating. It watches me specifically. Not Martinez, not Chen, me. And it's looking at my field journal and recording equipment with obvious interest. It's studying us, I whisper. No, it's studying me. That's when I notice something else. During our entire ordeal, the dogmen have killed the hikers and Thompson, all men who were armed with hunting rifles or large knives. But they've merely observed me as I take notes and recordings. They're selecting who they kill, I tell the others. They're targeting hunters, but watching researchers. The alpha tilts its head, as if understanding my words. Then, in a movement, so quick I barely register it, it retreats back into the forest. Now, Chen shouts, while they're moving back. We break into a run toward the extraction point, moving as fast as we can through the dense forest. We stick to our planned route. We have no choice if we want to reach the helicopter. As we enter a narrow ravine, I realize our mistake immediately. This is where they wanted us to go. The walls rise on either side, leaving us only one direction. To move, Martinez panics. He pulls out his gun and fires into the trees. The gunshot echoes off the ravine walls. What happens next is like watching a military operation. The dogmen move in perfect coordination. Some appear on the ridges above, drawing our attention with howls and movement, while others slip silently through the shadows behind us. A large dogman drops from above, landing directly behind Martinez. He turns and fires, but it's already moving, ducking under his aim. The creature grabs his arm with one clawed hand and twists. The gun falls. "Run!" Martinez screams at us. Chen pulls me forward as I watch in horror. The dogman doesn't simply attack Martinez. It takes him down methodically, slicing through specific tendons to immobilize without killing. As we sprint ahead, I look back to see Martinez on the ground. The alpha approaches him, joined by 2 others. They begin to field dress him with terrifying precision while he's still conscious, collecting specific organs, ignoring others. We're almost at the extraction point when Chen falls, a stone projectile, hitting him in the back of the head. It was thrown with incredible accuracy from one of the ridges. I keep running, tears streaming down my face, my lungs burning. The clearing where the helicopter should meet us is just ahead. Suddenly, the alpha dogman steps into my path. It stands there, blocking my way, studying me with those intelligent eyes. Then it does something that will haunt me forever. "Researcher," it growls, the word broken and guttural but unmistakably English. It's attempting to mimic human speech. It reaches toward my recorder and notebook, not grabbing them, but pointing with elongated fingers that are somewhere between human hands and wolf paws. A sound breaks the moment, helicopter blades chopping through the air in the distance. The dogman's ears twitch, listening. For a moment, we just stare at each other. Predator and prey, but also 2 intelligent beings trying to understand one another. Then it backs away, but not before reaching down and rearranging the papers that had fallen from my pack when I ran. It deliberately circles certain words on my notes. Study, learn, hunt. The helicopter appears overhead, its downdraft bending the trees. As I frantically wave my arms, I see dozens of dogmen emerging from hiding places throughout the forest. Far more than we ever estimated. They've been watching us the entire time. The rescue team pulls me up on a rope harness, firing warning shots to keep the creatures at bay. As we rise into the air, I see the alpha standing in the clearing, watching me leave. It makes no attempt to attack. It simply observes, learning. 6 months later, I'm working at a different ranger station in Colorado. I've tried to put White Mountain behind me, but the nightmares still come. No one fully believed my story, of course. The official report calls it a tragic series of animal attacks, possibly bears or mountain lions. But I know the truth. And I've spent every day since then looking over my shoulder. Today, a package arrived addressed to me. No return address. Inside is my missing field journal, the one I lost during the final chase. The pages are dirty and weathered, but that's not what makes my blood freeze. The journal is filled with new writing, crude but recognizable English words alongside detailed anatomical drawings of humans. The handwriting is awkward, like someone holding a pen for the first time, pressing too hard in some places, too light in others. One page has a map of the national park system with certain areas circled. Another shows sketches of ranger stations across the country. And there on the last page is a drawing of me. Next to it, written in that strange, forced handwriting, we learn, we watch, we hunt better next time. I close the journal with shaking hands. I need to warn someone, but who would believe me? The dogmen aren't just predators hunting in our forests. They're students learning our weaknesses, our behaviors, our technologies. And according to those old records, next fall will mark 17 years since their last major hunt. They'll be coming again, better prepared, more knowledgeable, more dangerous, and this time they know exactly who I am. My name is Victor Marsh, and I've been a park ranger at Redwood National Park for almost 7 years now. There's something about these ancient trees that feels like home to me. Every morning before the tourists arrive, I like to walk alone among the giants. That's what I call the oldest redwoods, the giants. Some have been standing here for over 1,000 years, silent watchers of time. It was during one of these early morning walks last April when I first noticed something strange. The sun was just coming up, sending golden rays through the branches. I was enjoying the quiet, no voices, no cameras clicking, just the occasional bird call and the soft sound of my boots on the trail. That's when I saw it, a weird shimmer in the air between some of the oldest trees. It looked like heat waves, you know, like what you see above hot pavement in summer, but it was a cool morning, maybe 50 degrees. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but the shimmer was still there. I made a note in my little ranger notebook to check for any unusual thermal activity in that area. Maybe there was some kind of underground hot spring we didn't know about. The next day, I ran into Eleanor Whitefeather. She's a local guide from the indigenous community who sometimes helps with educational tours about the cultural history of the forest. I mentioned I was heading to check out the grove with the strange air shimmer. Her face changed immediately. The doorway trees. You shouldn't go there, Victor. The doorway trees? I asked. Is that what the locals call it? Eleanor nodded, her eyes serious. That place is where the line between worlds thins. My grandmother warned me never to enter that grove, especially not alone. I laughed it off at the time. Eleanor was always full of stories and legends, and while I respected her knowledge, I was a man of science. Strange atmospheric conditions had scientific explanations, not supernatural ones. Later that week, I went back to examine the area more carefully. That's when I noticed something truly odd. The 7 largest redwoods in that particular grove had unusual scarring on their trunks. Deep parallel gouges ran up and down the bark, at least 30 feet up, way too high for any animal to reach. Bears can climb, sure, but these marks didn't look like bear claws. They were too precise, almost deliberate. Out of curiosity, I set up some wildlife cameras around the grove. When I checked the footage a few days later, I noticed something weird. The deer and smaller animals were deliberately avoiding the area between those 7 scarred trees. Even when a mountain lion was chasing a deer, the deer took a longer route around rather than cutting through the grove. Animals have good instincts about danger, and this behavior made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But the real trouble started when people began to disappear. A young couple, hikers in their 20s, went off trail, something we specifically tell visitors not to do. When they didn't return to their campsite that night, we organized a search party. We found their backpacks and water bottles near the edge of that same grove. Their camera was lying on the ground like it had been dropped, in a hurry. When we checked the photos later, my blood ran cold. The last image showed what looked like a tall, impossibly thin figure, partially hidden behind one of the doorway trees. It was blurry, like it was moving fast when the picture was taken, but there was definitely something there that shouldn't have been. Our search teams combed every inch of that section of forest for days. We brought in dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging, everything. No trace of the couple was ever found. But several rangers, myself included, reported hearing voices while searching, distant calls for help that seemed to come from impossible directions, sometimes from above the forest canopy where no human could possibly be. That's when I started digging through the old ranger logs. What I found kept me up at night. Similar disappearances dating back to 1937, all within the same 5-acre section of forest. All unsolved. All eventually forgotten, except I couldn't forget. And I knew I had to find out what was happening in those woods, no matter what it cost me. After 5 days, the official search for the missing couple was called off. My boss told everyone to return to normal duties, but I couldn't just move on like nothing happened. Those people deserved answers, and I was determined to find them. I set up a small research camp near the grove, not too close, but where I could keep an eye on things. I brought my tent, some basic equipment, notebooks and cameras. I didn't tell my supervisor what I was doing. This was on my own time now. Strange things started happening right away. My compass needle would spin in circles instead of pointing north. My watch ran backward for hours before stopping completely. Brand new batteries in my flashlight would drain overnight, even when the flashlight was turned off. None of it made any sense. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in my tent, listening to the forest. Around midnight, I started seeing faint lights moving between the 7 scarred trees. They weren't flashlights or fireflies, more like floating orbs that seemed to follow patterns, like they were communicating. The weird thing was, I could only see them from the corner of my eye. When I tried to look directly at them, they disappeared. One night, I left my radio on by accident. Through the static, I heard fragments of conversations, people talking in English, but using outdated slang from different time periods. A man talking about searching for his horse near the park entrance. We haven't had horses here since the 1950s. A woman discussing trail conditions using phrases from what sounded like the 1970s. And then, most disturbing of all, I heard my own voice. I was describing events that hadn't happened yet, talking about equipment I hadn't even purchased. I needed help understanding what was happening. Reluctantly, I went to find Eleanor Whitefeather again. "I knew you'd be back," she said, when I showed up at her door. She invited me in for tea, and I told her everything I'd seen. Eleanor was quiet for a long time before she spoke. "My people have stories about this place going back hundreds of years. We call them the Slender Watchers, beings that can move between dimensions, between different worlds, but they need doorways." She stared into her cup. "Ancient trees that have stood witness to centuries, can become those doorways under certain conditions." "What conditions?" I asked. "Places where the energies of the earth meet in unusual ways. Your science calls them geomagnetic anomalies." This gave me something concrete to research. Using equipment borrowed from the park's geology department, I discovered she was right. The grove sat exactly at an intersection of unusual magnetic field patterns. The readings were significantly different from the surrounding forest. About a month into my investigation, I got an unexpected visitor. Dr. Julia Reynolds from the University of California had heard about the disappearances through a colleague at the Park Service. She specialized in unusual geological and atmospheric phenomena and brought advanced equipment I could only dream of getting my hands on. Most of my colleagues think I'm crazy, she admitted as we set up her monitoring devices around the perimeter of the grove. But if even half of what you've documented is true, this could change our understanding of physical reality. Her sonic mapping devices picked up something immediately, ultra-low frequency sounds coming from the center of the grove. They were just below what human ears could hear, but when Dr. Reynolds amplified them for me to listen, my whole body felt wrong. A deep anxiety washed over me, like every cell was screaming, "Run away." As the days passed, things got even stranger. I'd start setting up equipment at my camp in the morning, then suddenly wake up somewhere else in the forest hours later, with no memory of how I got there or what I'd been doing. It was like someone had cut pieces out of my day. Dr. Reynolds made an especially disturbing discovery while researching historical records of the park. She found photographs of the 7 doorway trees from 1937, 1954, 1972, and 1998. In each photo, the surrounding redwoods had grown taller and wider, but those 7 trees hadn't changed at all, not a single inch of growth in over 80 years. One morning, I checked the trail cameras I'd hidden near the grove. Most showed nothing unusual, but one captured an image that still haunts my dreams. It was a figure that looked almost human, but wrong in every possible way. Its limbs were too long and thin, like they'd been stretched, its joints bent in directions human joints simply can't move. And its fingers, they were like needles, impossibly long and sharp. The next day we found fresh markings carved into the forest floor. Complex symbols arranged in perfect circles around the grove. Dr. Reynolds took photos and spent hours analyzing them. "They're mathematical," she said, her voice shaking with excitement or fear. I couldn't tell which. They could be representing higher dimensions, ways of mapping spaces beyond the 3 dimensions we experience. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was happening in that grove wasn't natural. And it was getting stronger, despite all our warning signs and the park ranger's attempts to keep people away. A group of 3 hikers ventured too close to the grove one afternoon. I was at my camp reviewing Dr. Reynolds' notes when I heard the first scream. It wasn't like any scream I'd heard before. It echoed from everywhere at once, like the forest itself was screaming. Then more voices joined in, terrified and desperate. I grabbed my radio and called for backup while Dr. Reynolds and I ran toward the grove. The screaming continued for hours, fading in and out like a bad radio signal. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes miles away, sometimes from underground, sometimes from high above the trees. By the time other rangers arrived, the screams had stopped. We searched until nightfall and found nothing. Then, as the sun was setting, I spotted something near the edge of the grove, a single hiking boot. Inside was a foot, severed cleanly at the ankle. But something was wrong with it. The skin looked like it belonged to an 80-year-old, wrinkled and spotted, even though the boot was new and the size suggested a young man. "It's like it aged decades in minutes," Dr. Reynolds whispered, her face pale in the fading light. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside my tent, watching the grove from a distance. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The massive trees were moving, not swaying in the wind. There was no wind. They were slowly rotating, the huge trunks turning slightly toward the center of the grove when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'd blink, and a tree would be in a slightly different position. Dr. Reynolds set up radiation detectors the next morning, and they immediately started picking up unusual spikes. Each spike lasted just a fraction of a second and coincided with glimpses of those thin, wrong-looking figures moving between the trees. They were becoming bolder, easier to see. No longer just at night or in peripheral vision. Things got even stranger when I discovered my own footprints in areas of the forest I hadn't visited. Some showed me walking in impossible patterns, straight up vertical surfaces or in perfect circles, with no entry or exit tracks. It was like someone or something was pretending to be me, but didn't understand how humans move. The wildlife started, behaving oddly too. Birds flew in perfect geometric shapes, not natural flocking patterns, but precise triangles and squares. Deer would stand completely still for hours, all facing the grove, not even blinking. Most disturbing were the insects. Ants, beetles, and flies would gather in swarms that briefly took the shape of human-like figures before dispersing. Dr. Reynolds became increasingly fascinated and spent more time near the grove than I was comfortable. She'd talk about breakthrough and contact with growing excitement. I was worried about her, but she was an adult and a respected scientist. I couldn't stop her from doing her research. One morning, she went to collect data alone while I met with my supervisor to try once again to get the area officially closed off. When I returned to camp that afternoon, Dr. Reynolds was gone. Her equipment was still running, recording data. Her voice recorder was still on. I played back the recording, and at first, it was normal. Dr. Reynolds calmly describing readings and observations, but about 30 minutes in, her voice changed. She started speaking faster, more excitedly. "The readings are off the charts," she said. "I can see them now, even in broad daylight. They're watching me from between the trees. They're curious. I think they're trying to communicate." The recording continued for another 10 minutes, her observations becoming stranger. Then her voice changed completely as she simply said, "They're coming through." What followed chilled my blood. The voice was still using the recorder, still speaking English, but it wasn't Dr. Reynolds anymore. It sounded like someone learning to speak for the first time. Perfect pronunciation, but with emphasis on all the wrong syllables, pauses in unnatural places. It described human bodies as interesting temporary arrangements of matter, and time as a quaint local custom. I called for an emergency search and rescue team immediately. 6 rangers volunteered to help me look for Dr. Reynolds. None of us wanted to enter the grove itself, but we knew that's where she had likely disappeared. As we prepared our gear, one of the rangers found Dr. Reynolds' notebook lying open on her equipment case. The pages were filled with increasingly frantic sketches of elongated figures standing between trees. The first drawings were rough and uncertain, but each page showed them more clearly defined, more mathematically precise, as if she was truly seeing them better over time. The last page simply read, "They are windows, not doors." The next morning, our search party approached the grove. None of us wanted to go in, but we had to find Dr. Reynolds. As we crossed the invisible line into the grove, every one of us felt it. A strange pulling sensation on our skin, like our bodies were being gently tugged in different directions. "Does anyone else feel that?" whispered Karen, one of the newer rangers. We all nodded. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud, to admit something was very wrong with this place. Inside the grove, our equipment failed completely. Watches stopped. Compasses spun uselessly. Cell phones showed no signal, then turned off by themselves. Even stranger were the visual distortions. Trees that looked close would somehow take minutes to walk to. Others that seemed far away would suddenly be right in front of us after just a few steps. "Look at this," called out Mike, the oldest ranger in our group. He was holding Dr. Reynolds' notebook we'd found earlier. There are more pages filled out, recent entries. That was impossible. We'd had the notebook with us overnight, locked, in my truck. Yet now it contained additional sketches and notes in Dr. Reynolds' handwriting, observations dated for today, a day she had been missing. We spread out slightly, staying within eyesight of each other as we searched. I was checking behind a massive fallen log when I heard Alex scream, "There's something watching us." He was pointing between 2 of the giant redwoods. "Right there. Don't you see it?" I looked where he was pointing, but saw only more forest stretching out beyond. But wait, that was wrong. I knew the park's boundaries like the back of my hand. There should have been a maintenance road about 50 yards in that direction. Instead, there was just more forest, stretching impossibly far. Things got worse when we realized the sun was in the wrong place. When I looked up through the branches near one tree, the sun was directly overhead, like it was noon. But when Karen looked up from just 20 feet away, she said the sun was low on the horizon, like early morning. "It's in two places at once," she said, her voice shaking. That's when I noticed the strands. Thin, almost clear threads connecting the 7 main trees like a giant spider web. You could only see them when the light hit just right, shimmering briefly before disappearing. Again, curious, I reached out to touch one. The moment my finger contacted the nearly invisible strand, my mind exploded with visions. Landscapes that couldn't exist on Earth. Skies with multiple suns. Forests where the trees were crystal. Oceans that flowed upward into the clouds. The visions lasted only a second, but I stumbled back, gasping. Our radios had been silent since entering the grove, but suddenly mine crackled to life. A woman's voice came through clearly. "Dr. Reynolds, the search party is now examining the connecting strands," she said calmly. "Victor has just experienced visual hallucinations after physical contact with the filament network. Karen will be the next to disappear. Approximately 4 minutes from now." The radio clicked off. We all stared at each other in horror. The transmission was dated 3 days in the future. "How does she know what we're doing right now?" Karen whispered, backing away from the group. "And what does she mean I'll disappear?" We decided to stick together after that. No one allowed to be more than an arm's length from another person. That's why we all witnessed what happened to Tom. One moment he was right there, in the middle of saying, "We should mark our path so we don't get turned around." And the next moment he was gone, not running away, not falling into a hidden hole, simply there, then not there. All that remained were his footprints in the soft forest floor, ending mid-stride. Panic set in. We started moving quickly, trying to find our way out of the grove. But no matter which direction we walked, we somehow ended up back at the center, among the 7 massive scarred trees. "There!" shouted Alex, pointing frantically. "Look!" We all turned and saw what he was seeing. 2 more of our group, Rangers Ben and Karen, simply vanished before our eyes. No sound, no flash of light. Just there 1 second, gone the next. That's when we saw the trees opening. It's hard to describe if you haven't seen it yourself. The bark split vertically, but instead of seeing wood inside, there was darkness. Not the darkness of a hollow tree, but a shimmering, moving darkness that seemed to go on forever. "Run!" I shouted, though I had no idea which way was out anymore. Compass directions had become meaningless in this place. As we ran, I saw it step out from behind one of the largest trees, a tall, impossibly thin figure. It looked almost like a person, but stretched out, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. The strangest thing was how it seemed flat, like a paper cutout. No matter which angle you viewed it from, it was always edge-on, impossibly thin. More of them appeared between the trees, moving with jerky, unnatural movements. Some didn't look solid at all, more like holes cut into reality, moving spaces of nothing that somehow had a shape. Mike, who had been just ahead of me, suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. One of the entities was approaching him, its impossibly long arms stretching out, fingers like needles extending toward him. I called out for him to run, but he seemed frozen in place. The entity touched him, just a light brush of those needle fingers against his cheek. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Mike's body seemed to age before our eyes, his hair whitening, skin wrinkling, back hunching. His scream changed from the deep yell of a healthy 40-year-old man to the thin, reedy cry of someone very elderly. The whole process took maybe 5 seconds before the entity wrapped those long fingers around him completely and pulled him into the space between trees. He was just gone. Another ranger made the mistake of looking directly at one of the entities. Their eyes met for just an instant, but I saw the ranger's face cycle through changes. Stubble grew into a beard, then white hair, then receded again, over and over, like time was malfunctioning around him. For me, it felt like weeks passed in those few seconds, my mind experiencing day after day of being lost in this twisted version of the forest, though my body stayed in place. There were only 3 of us left now, huddled together, as dozens of the thin entities circled us, moving faster and faster between the trees. Sometimes they appeared to be in multiple places at once, like watching a strobe light flicker on a moving object. They were closing in. In that moment of pure terror, with the entities closing in around us, a memory flashed through my mind. Eleanor Whitefeather had mentioned something, old protection methods her people had used. I still had my backpack with me, and inside was a small pouch of items Eleanor had given me just in case. She must have known something like this might happen. "Quick, form a circle!" I shouted to Alex and Sarah, the only rangers still with me. With shaking hands, I pulled out the pouch and emptied it. Small rocks of different colors, a bundle of dried herbs, and a folded paper with words written in a language I didn't recognize. Following the simple diagram Eleanor had drawn, I placed the stones in a circle around us, trying to ignore the entities that were getting closer. "What are you doing?" Sarah whispered, her eyes darting between the approaching figures. "Something that might save our lives," I said, hoping I was right. I started reading the words from the paper out loud. They felt strange in my mouth, ancient words that seemed to vibrate in the air around us. As I spoke, the stones began to give off a faint glow, and the air around our small circle seemed to solidify, like an invisible wall was forming. The entities stopped their approach, hovering at the edge of our circle. They moved their thin bodies from side to side, as if trying to find a way through our protection. For the moment, at least, we were safe. "It won't last long," I warned my companions. "We need to find a way out while we can." That's when I saw her. Dr. Reynolds emerged from between 2 of the trees, but it wasn't really her anymore. She walked wrong, her joints bending backward, her movements too fluid to be human. When she spoke, multiple voices came from her mouth at once, like several people talking over each other. "Victor Marsh," the Reynolds thing said, its head tilting at an impossible angle. "We have been curious about you." "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "We are observers," it replied. "We exist in more directions than you can perceive. What you call time is merely another spatial dimension to us. Your 3-dimensional world is a flat surface we can step into and out of." The thing wearing Dr. Reynolds' body explained in broken and confusing terms that these entities existed in higher dimensions. They used the ancient redwoods as anchors to stabilize themselves when entering our reality, and they had been studying humans for centuries. "We do not mean harm," it said, though the words seemed to hold no real meaning to it. "Your friends are not dead. They are simply experiencing all moments of their existence simultaneously. It is overwhelming for beings like you. I could feel our protection weakening. The glowing stones were dimming, and the entities were pressing closer. "We need to go now," I said to Alex and Sarah. "When I say run, head for that gap between the trees. Don't stop. Don't look back." The Reynolds thing tilted its head again. "You cannot escape what is already inside you, Victor Marsh. You have touched the filaments. You are connected now." I ignored its words and watched for my chance. The protective circle was failing. On one side, but the entities seemed less concentrated in one direction. "Now!" I shouted, grabbing my remaining companions by their arms. We burst through the weakening barrier and ran as fast as we could toward what I hoped was the edge of the grove. The entities pursued us, moving with impossible speed. Sometimes they appeared ahead of us on the trail, forcing us to change direction. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but pure fear kept me running. Finally, we crossed some invisible boundary, and suddenly the forest looked normal again. The compass, on my watch, sprang to life, pointing steadily north. Behind us, something strange was happening to the grove. It's hard to describe, like the space itself was folding inward, the trees bending in ways that hurt my eyes to look at. We made it. Back to the ranger station, but no one believed our story. The official report listed the missing rangers and Dr. Reynolds as lost in a sudden landslide, even though there had been no landslide. The grove was declared off-limits due to unstable ground, which was fine by me. No one should ever go. There again, Alex quit the ranger service a week later. Sarah transferred to a park in another state. I stayed, feeling somehow responsible for keeping people away from that place. That was 5 years ago. I'm still a ranger at Redwood National Park, but I'm not the same person I was. Something changed in me after touching those filaments, just as the Reynolds thing said. I experience time differently now. Sometimes I see brief glimpses of events before they happen. My reflection doesn't always move when I do, sometimes lagging behind or moving slightly ahead. Worst of all are the moments when I catch glimpses of my future self, an older version of me, watching from between perfectly normal trees, not just in the park, but anywhere in the world. I've sealed off the grove as best I can. I've warned everyone I can think of. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear voices calling from impossible directions. And I know the doorway between worlds isn't really closed. It's just waiting. The entities are patient. They exist outside our understanding of time. They can wait forever for another chance to study us up close. So if you're ever hiking in Redwood National Park and you come across trail markers warning you away from a particular grove or signs declaring an area closed, please turn around. Go back to the main paths. Stay with other people, and if you ever see a shimmer in the air between ancient trees, like heat waves on a cool day, don't get closer to investigate. Run. Run as fast as you can in the opposite direction, because the forest between worlds is real, and its inhabitants are watching, always watching, from just behind the trees. My name is James Ramirez. After 15 years with the Chicago Police Department, I traded the city noise for the quiet of Glacier National Park in Montana. Most people think I'm crazy for choosing to live in such a lonely place, especially during winter. But after what happened with my partner back in Chicago, lonely is exactly what I needed. I stood by my cabin window, watching the heavy snow pile up on the mountain peaks. The flakes were falling so thick and fast that I could barely see the trees just 50 feet away. The weather report on my crackling radio wasn't good news. Attention all park rangers and personnel. The National Weather Service has issued a severe blizzard warning for Glacier National Park and surrounding areas. This storm is expected to be the worst in decades, with temperatures dropping below -30 and snowfall exceeding 4 feet. All stations should prepare for isolation periods of at least 1 week. Emergency protocols are now in effect. I sighed and took another sip of my coffee. The cabin was stocked with enough food and firewood to last me through 2 weeks of isolation. And honestly, I was looking forward to the quiet. Just me, my books, and no one asking if I was doing okay with those pitying eyes. That's when I saw them, shapes moving through the blinding snow. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no. There were definitely people out there. 4 dark figures struggling against the wind, clearly lost and in danger. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed my heavy coat and emergency kit. The last thing I wanted was company, but I couldn't leave anyone out there to freeze to death. I pushed open the door, the wind nearly knocking me backward, and waved my emergency flashlight. "Over here!" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the howling wind. But they saw the light and changed direction toward my cabin. By the time they stumbled through my door, they were covered in snow and shivering. Well, most of them were. There were 3 men and 1 woman, all looking half frozen except for one guy who seemed oddly comfortable despite wearing less winter gear than the others. "Thank you," gasped the oldest man of the group, probably in his 60s, with a grey beard and glasses frosted over. "We thought we were goners out there." I waved them toward the fireplace. "Get those wet clothes off and warm up. I'll make some hot coffee." As they peeled off layers of frozen outerwear, they introduced themselves between chattering teeth. "I'm Professor Elijah Morgan," said the older man. "We were on a research expedition studying ancient rock drawings, petroglyphs, made by the native tribes of this region." The young Asian woman was next, her hands trembling as she held them toward the fire. "Lisa Tran. I'm a medical student at University of Washington. I joined the professor's team to get some field research experience." A guy with a fancy camera bag slung across his chest nodded at me. "Daniel Hughes, photographer. I document the professor's findings." The last man, the one who didn't seem as affected by the cold, watched me with strange intensity. "Frank Webster," he said with a slight smile. "Wilderness guide?" For a guide, he didn't seem particularly bothered by their predicament. While the others huddled by the fire, desperately trying to get warm, Frank merely brushed the snow from his lighter jacket and glanced around my cabin like he was memorizing every detail. I handed out mugs of hot coffee and some blankets I kept for emergencies. "What happened to your equipment? Supplies?" Professor Morgan took a long sip before answering. "We were documenting a particularly interesting set of petroglyphs about 5 miles east of here. The storm came in much faster than predicted. We had to abandon our camp and most of our gear when visibility dropped to nearly 0. Frank tried to lead us back to our vehicles," Lisa added, "but we got turned around in the whiteout conditions." I nodded, looking at the so-called guide. For someone who just failed at his one job and nearly gotten everyone killed, he didn't seem particularly concerned or apologetic. "Well, you're stuck here now," I told them, watching the snow pile up against the windows. "Radio says this storm could trap us for at least a week, maybe longer." "We're very grateful for your help, Ranger," the professor trailed off, realizing I hadn't introduced myself. "Ramirez," I said. "James Ramirez." Frank's eyes never left me. "Lucky for us, you were here, Ranger Ramirez," he said in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, despite the roaring fire. "Very lucky indeed." I didn't know then just how unlucky we all actually were. I didn't know that not everyone who had stumbled into my cabin that night was human, and I definitely didn't know that by morning the real horror would begin. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. Scratch, 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 like fingernails on the wooden walls of my cabin. At first I thought I was dreaming, but there it was again. Soft scraping sounds coming from the roof and walls. I sat up in bed listening hard. Maybe it was just tree branches in the wind, but the scratching didn't have that random quality. It sounded careful, planned. I grabbed my flashlight and gun, old habits from my police days, and stepped quietly into the main room. My guests were sleeping on cots and the couch. Everyone seemed to be there, though it was hard to tell in the dim light of the dying fire. The scratching continued. I pulled on my boots and coat and stepped outside into the freezing night. The snow was still coming down hard, the wind pushing it into drifts against the cabin. I swept my flashlight beam around but saw nothing except swirling white. The scratching stopped the moment I stepped outside. "Just the wind," I muttered to myself, but I didn't believe it. I walked around the cabin, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. When I came back inside, I noticed Frank sitting up on his cot, watching me. "Everything okay, Ranger?" he asked. "Thought I heard something," I said. "Probably just the storm." He nodded but didn't lie back down. I went back to bed, but didn't sleep much after that. Morning came with no let-up in the storm. The snow was now piled halfway up the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. I made breakfast for everyone, and that's when the strange things really started. Lisa was digging through her backpack with a worried look on her face. "Something wrong?" I asked, handing her a plate of scrambled eggs. "My stuff's been moved around," she said, "and my journal, some pages are missing." "Which pages?" the professor asked, looking up from his coffee. "The ones where I wrote down our exact route to the petroglyph site." She looked around at all of us. Who would take them? No one answered. I looked at each face, wondering. After breakfast, Daniel decided to show me some photos of the petroglyphs they'd been studying. He turned on his expensive camera and frowned. "That's weird," he said, clicking through settings. "All my memory cards are corrupted. Every single photo is gone." "Could be the cold," I suggested, but I didn't really believe it. Modern equipment is built to handle low temperatures. I tried the radio next, hoping to check in with neighboring ranger stations. I tuned through the channels, but got nothing but static and strange whispers. I could almost make out words in the white noise, but not in any language I recognized. "Any luck?" Frank asked, suddenly right behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, jumped slightly. No, Storm must be interfering. Throughout the day, I noticed more odd things. Frank knew where I kept the emergency supplies without being told. He walked straight to the cabinet, where I stored extra blankets when Lisa said she was cold. He found the toolbox in the storage closet without asking where it was. "You seem to know your way around pretty well," I said casually. "All these ranger cabins have similar layouts," he replied with a shrug. "But I'd worked in 3 different parks, and the layouts were never the same." That evening, the professor told us more about the petroglyphs they'd discovered. "They depict what the local tribes called skin dancers," he explained, his eyes bright with academic excitement. "Fascinating, really. They were supposedly shape-shifting creatures that could take on human appearance." "How did they do that?" I asked, thinking it was just old tribal stories. "The legends say they could, well, wear people like clothes. They would study a person, learn their mannerisms, then somehow take their form." He adjusted his glasses. "The tribes believed these creatures would come during the worst storms, when people were isolated and vulnerable." I noticed Frank watching Daniel closely as the photographer talked about his equipment. Later that night, Frank used one of Daniel's favorite phrases, "That tracks," in exactly the same way Daniel said it. He even copied Daniel's habit of tapping his fingers on the table when thinking. The cabin seemed to get colder whenever Frank was nearby. I noticed frost patterns forming on the windows around him, even though the fire was going strong. During dinner, Lisa told us about her fiancé back home. "He's probably worried sick," she said. "Tall guy, dark curly hair, has this little scar on his chin from a bike accident when he was 12. Always wears this tacky university ring I keep telling him to get rid of." Later, she showed me a photo from her wallet. The man in the picture had straight blonde hair and no visible scar, no ring either. When I pointed this out, Lisa looked confused for a moment, then quickly put the photo away. After dinner, I went outside to check the generator and get more firewood. That's when I saw them, footprints in the snow, small triangular prints that came toward the cabin from several directions. None of them led away. They weren't animal tracks, at least not from any animal I knew, and they definitely weren't human. I followed one set to the cabin wall, right below my bedroom window. They just stopped there, as if whatever made them had walked straight up the wall. When I got back inside, the radio suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, I heard another ranger's voice. "Repeat, be on alert for unknown individuals claiming to be hikers. All stations should..." The voice cut out, then came back. "Maintain isolation protocols until..." I grabbed the radio, trying to respond. But then another voice broke through, panicked and breathless. "It can look like anyone now. It took Simmons, and now it's wearing his..." The transmission dissolved into screaming, then nothing but static. Everyone stared at the radio in silence. Then Professor Morgan stood up suddenly, his face pale. "The petroglyphs," he said, his voice shaking. "They weren't just stories. They showed exactly how these skin dancers operate. They come in storms. They infiltrate groups of people. They isolate them, and then..." He couldn't finish the sentence. No one slept well that night. I lay awake wondering which of my guests might not be what they seemed, or if any of them were still who they claimed to be. That night I had trouble falling asleep. Every creak of the cabin in the wind made me sit up straight. When I finally did drift off, I woke up suddenly with that feeling you get when someone's watching you. I opened my eyes and nearly yelled. Frank was standing at the foot of my bed, just staring at me. He didn't move or speak. He just stood there in the darkness, his outline barely visible in the faint light coming through my window. "Frank?" I whispered, my hand sliding toward the gun I kept under my pillow. "What are you doing?" He tilted his head slightly like he was studying me. "Sleepwalking," he finally said, but his voice didn't sound sleepy at all. "Sorry to disturb you, Ranger." He turned and walked out of my room. I listened to his footsteps and heard him lie back down on his cot in the main room. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, everyone seemed on edge. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, it was getting worse. The wind howled so loudly, it was hard to hear each other talk. I went to the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face. As I looked up at the mirror, something felt wrong. My reflection moved just a tiny bit too slow, like there was a delay between what I did and what the mirror showed. I waved my hand quickly, and sure enough, my reflection was just a split second behind. At breakfast, I watched everyone in the shiny side of the toaster. The same weird delay happened with Frank's reflection, and now Daniel's too. Lisa pulled me aside after breakfast. "My medical bag's been messed with," she whispered. "My scalpels and scissors are gone." "Missing or just moved?" I asked. "Gone, completely gone." Her eyes darted toward the others, and I'm not the only one missing things. The professor can't find his special pen, and Daniel says his backup camera battery disappeared. While everyone was busy eating, I decided to check the guest quarters more carefully. The cabin was small, but had 2 bedrooms, mine and a larger one, where the professor and Lisa slept. Daniel and Frank were on cots in the main room. I looked under the beds first, then checked in the closet. Nothing seemed out of place until I noticed a floorboard that didn't sit quite right with the others. I pried it up carefully and nearly threw up at what I found. Hidden under the floor were thin strips of what looked like dried skin, human skin. Some pieces even had partial fingerprints on them. I put the floorboard back quickly, my heart racing. The storm outside reached impossible levels. The temperature dropped to 50 below zero, according to my thermometer. The wind speed had to be at least 100 miles per hour, howling like a train. No normal storm lasted this long or got this bad. It felt targeted, like something was making sure we stayed trapped. I watched Daniel and Frank closely throughout the day. They started finishing each other's sentences like they were sharing thoughts. Once, they both reached for a cup at exactly the same time, using the exact same motion. When Daniel noticed me watching, he quickly put his hand down. I also realized something else strange. I hadn't seen either Frank or Daniel use the bathroom once since they arrived, and they only seemed to eat when someone was looking directly at them. Professor Morgan spent the day frantically going through his notes that had survived the journey. That evening, he pulled me aside while the others were playing cards. "I've translated more of the petroglyphs from my notes," he whispered, his hands shaking. "The skin dancers, they need to keep their original form somewhere nearby. They hide it while they're wearing someone else's appearance." "What do you mean, their original form?" I asked. "Their real body. They can't completely transform. They need to shed their natural skin and store it somewhere safe." like a snake shedding its skin, but they have to go back to it regularly to maintain their human disguise. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. How do we find it? I asked. The tribes would look for strange bundles, hidden near their camps, things that didn't belong. After our talk, I went to check the generator outside. The storm had let up just a tiny bit, and I could see maybe 20 feet into the trees now. That's when I noticed something hanging from a distant branch. Several dark, human-shaped bags swaying gently in the wind. I wanted to go check, but the snow was too deep and the cold too dangerous. I went back inside with an awful feeling in my gut. The next morning, Lisa's scream woke everyone up. She'd gone to get some supplies from a storage closet we rarely used and found Daniel, the real Daniel, stuffed inside. His body was cold, and his face had been removed, cut off with surgical precision. I ran to the main room, gun drawn. The Daniel who had been with us for the past day was calmly eating breakfast. He didn't even look up when I entered. "Don't move," I yelled, pointing my gun at him. He slowly raised his head and smiled. It wasn't Daniel's smile anymore. It was something trying to be human and not quite getting it right. "Problem, Ranger Ramirez?" he asked in Daniel's voice, perfectly mimicking his speech pattern. Frank stood up and moved to block the cabin's exit door. He and the thing pretending to be Daniel exchanged a look that made my skin crawl. "Get away from the door, Frank," I said, keeping my gun pointed at the thing that looked like Daniel. My police training kicked in, but nothing had prepared me for this. Professor Morgan rushed into the room, holding a water bottle filled with what looked like salty water. "I know what you are," he said, his voice shaking but brave. The ancient texts described a test. Before any of us could react, he splashed the salt water onto fake Daniel's face. For a second, nothing happened. Then fake Daniel's skin seemed to bubble and shift, like it didn't fit right anymore. Fake Daniel's face twisted in anger. "That was rude, Professor. What happened next still gives me nightmares." Fake Daniel's jaw stretched open, much wider than any human jaw should, and lunged at the professor. I fired my gun, but it was too late. The creature bit into Professor Morgan's throat with teeth that suddenly seemed too sharp, too numerous. The professor fell to the ground, blood pooling around. Lisa screamed and ran to him, but I knew it was too late. "Lisa, get back!" I yelled, firing again at fake Daniel. The bullets hit him, but he barely flinched. His skin rippled strangely where the bullets entered, like waves on water. Frank hadn't moved from the door. His face was calm, watching everything with cold interest. Then the two of them, Frank and fake Daniel, started making clicking sounds to each other. Not speaking exactly, but communicating somehow. "What are you?" I asked, backing up slowly, keeping Lisa behind me. Fake Daniel smiled, blood dripping from his mouth. "We are very old, Ranger Ramirez. We were here long before your kind built. Cabins in our hunting grounds." His skin kept shifting slightly, like something underneath was moving around, trying to get comfortable. "The storm," I said, suddenly understanding. "You created it to trap us here." Frank nodded. "We can influence the weather in small ways, useful for isolating prey." Lisa tugged my arm and whispered, "The radio room. We need to get to the radio." I nodded slightly. The cabin had a small room where I kept the emergency radio equipment. It had only one door and small windows, easier to defend than the main room. "On three," I whispered back. "1, 2, 3. We ran for the radio room. I fired twice more at fake Daniel to slow him down. We made it inside and slammed the door shut, quickly pushing a heavy desk against it. "That won't hold them for long," I said, looking around for anything we could use as a weapon. Lisa was already at the radio, frantically turning dials. "Hello? Is anyone out there? Emergency at Ranger Station 8? To our surprise, the radio crackled to life. "Hello, Ranger Station 8. This is Frank Webster. Do you copy?" We froze. Frank's voice was coming through the radio, but Frank was outside our door, trying to get in. "More hikers are heading your way, Ranger Ramirez," the voice continued. "They got caught in the storm. 5 of them should reach your cabin by nightfall. Over." My blood ran cold. More people were coming, more victims. Outside our door we could hear the skinwalkers talking in their clicking language. Then they started hitting the door. The desk moved an inch with each blow. They were incredibly strong. "We need a plan," Lisa said, her face pale but determined. "My advanced biology class covered some old tribal legends. There might be a way to kill them." "I'm all ears," I said, bracing myself against the desk as it moved another inch. "The legends say skinwalkers are vulnerable when they're changing forms. That's when they're between shapes and weakest." She pointed to her medical penlight. "And they hate UV light. It damages them somehow." I remembered the UV emergency lights in my supply closet. They were used for search and rescue in foggy conditions. If we could rig them up. The desk moved again as the creatures hit the door harder. A long grey finger with too many joints pushed through the small gap, feeling around blindly. "They're getting in," Lisa whispered. Suddenly, we heard the professor's voice, perfectly mimicked, coming from outside the door. "Do you know how they feed, Ranger?" the voice said conversationally. "They keep you alive as long as possible. They wear your face while they slowly consume the rest of you. Some victims stay conscious for days." Lisa looked like she might throw up, but then she grabbed her medical pen light and pointed it at the grayish finger poking through the door gap. When the UV light hit it, the finger seemed to smoke slightly and quickly withdrew. We heard an inhuman hissing sound from the other side. "It works," Lisa said. "An idea formed in my mind. I had a portable generator in the corner of the radio room, and those UV lights in the supply closet." "Lisa, I need you to help me set a trap," I said, quickly explaining my plan while the creatures continued their assault on the door. We worked fast, connecting the UV emergency lights to the generator. The creatures had stopped hitting the door, which worried me. What were they planning? Then the lights went out. They'd cut the power to the cabin. "Perfect timing," I whispered, connecting the last wire to our trap. "When I give the signal, hit the switch and then close your eyes tight." Lisa nodded, her hand on the switch of our makeshift UV bomb. I took a deep breath and called out, "Frank, Daniel, or whatever you really are, we want to talk. We can make a deal." The pounding on the door stopped. "What kind of deal, Ranger?" "Fake Daniels," voice asked, sounding curious. "Let Lisa go and you can have me," I said. "One meal is better than none, right?" There was a pause, more clicking sounds as they discussed. "Open the door," Frank's voice finally said. I nodded to Lisa. "Now!" I shouted. She flipped the switch and closed her eyes. I did the same, just as a blinding burst of UV light flooded the room and spilled under the door. The UV lights blasted through the small gap under the door. The skinwalkers screamed, not human screams, but high-pitched sounds like metal scraping metal. I had never heard anything like it. We heard thumping and thrashing outside, then a crash as something heavy fell. I risked opening my eyes just a bit. The UV light was still bright, but not blinding anymore. "Keep the lights on," I told Lisa as I pushed the desk away from the door. I had my gun ready and kicked the door open. What I saw will stay with me forever. The creatures were caught halfway between their human disguises and whatever they really were. Frank's face was melting away, revealing grayish-blue skin underneath. His arms had stretched, now too long for his body, with extra joints bending in. Wrong directions. Fake Daniel was worse, his whole body twisting and reshaping, with too many limbs trying to burst through his skin. They hissed and covered their eyes from the UV light. I fired at Frank Creature, hitting him in the chest. A thick, yellow fluid oozed out instead of blood. The fake Daniel creature recovered faster than I expected. He lunged at me, knocking the gun from my hand. His face was barely human now, just a mask slipping off something horrible underneath. I could see multiple eyes opening where there shouldn't be any, and teeth growing longer. I fought back with everything I had, but he was incredibly strong. His hands, or what used to be hands, wrapped around my throat. His skin felt cold and slippery, like touching a dead fish. Lisa grabbed my fallen gun and shot at the creature attacking me. She hit it in the shoulder, making it loosen its grip just enough for me to break free. I rolled away, grabbing a knife from my belt. The Frank creature made that high-pitched sound again, like a signal. The fake Daniel creature suddenly let go of me and grabbed Lisa. She screamed as it dragged her toward the cabin door. "No!" I yelled, jumping to my feet. The Frank creature blocked my path. I slashed at him with my knife, catching him across what used to be his face. The knife cut deep, and something amazing happened. The creature started changing rapidly, cycling, through different faces like flipping through a photo album. I saw dozens of people, men, women, old, young, their expressions frozen in terror. Some wore ranger uniforms from different parks. "How many?" I whispered, horrified. "How many people have you taken?" The creature didn't answer. It was dying, yellow fluid pouring from the wound. It made one final signal sound, louder and longer than before. Outside, the fake Daniel creature suddenly dropped Lisa and ran. It moved like nothing human, bending and crawling with too many limbs, disappearing into the blizzard. I helped Lisa back inside and barricaded the door. "Are you hurt?" She was shaking, but shook her head. "No. It dropped me when that one made that noise." She pointed to the dying Frank creature on the floor. We watched as it continued to shift through faces, going faster and faster until its features blurred together. Then it stopped moving completely. "Is it dead?" Lisa asked. I poked it with my knife. Nothing happened. "I think so." The storm outside suddenly lessened, just a little. For the first time in days, I could see through the windows more than a few feet. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Before the other one comes back, it might bring friends." We gathered what supplies we could carry and waited for the storm to calm enough to travel. When it did, we headed outside. About 100 yards from the cabin, we found what we had been dreading. The hanging shapes I'd glimpsed from my window. They were bodies, or what was left of them. Completely empty human skins hung like clothes on a line. One of them was clearly Frank Webster, the real Frank. "They were wearing them," Lisa whispered, her face pale. "Like suits." I nodded, feeling sick. "We need to find transportation." We trudged through deep snow to the shed where I kept the park vehicle. But when I popped the hood, I saw that key engine parts had been removed. The skinwalkers had planned well. "There's still the snowmobile," I said. It wasn't much, but it could get one person to the nearest ranger station about 15 miles away. As we prepared the snowmobile, the sky grew dark. I glanced around and felt my heart stop. Among the trees, I could see eyes watching us. At least 6 pairs, glowing slightly in the dim light. They weren't all at the same height. Some were low to the ground, some up high, like they were climbing in the trees. "More of them," I whispered to Lisa. "A lot more." She saw them too, and clutched my arm. "What do we do?" I made a quick decision. "You take the snowmobile, head east to Ranger Station 12. It's about 15 miles. Take this." I handed her my knife and a small box containing a skin sample from the dead creature. "Get this to people who can help. Tell them what happened here." "What about you?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears. "I'll draw them away. Give you time to escape." I picked up a flare gun from our supplies. "These things like to hunt, right? I'll give them something to chase." She tried to argue, but we both knew it was the only way. One of us had to make it out with evidence of what was happening. Lisa hugged me quickly. "Thank you for saving my life." "Just make sure someone believes you," I said. "Don't let anyone come back here without serious backup and lots of UV lights." I waited until she was on the snowmobile, then fired the flare in the opposite direction and started running, yelling to get the creature's attention. It worked. I heard them moving through the trees, following me instead of Lisa. I ran as fast. as I could through the snow, leading them deep into the forest, away from Lisa's escape route. The last thing I heard was the snowmobile engine fading in the distance. 6 months later, a new ranger arrived at Spruce Valley State Park, 200 miles from where it all happened. Ranger James Ramirez smiled as he shook hands with his new colleagues, his grip just a little too cold, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We're glad to have you here," the park supervisor said. "After what happened at your last post, well, you deserve a fresh start." "I'm just happy to be back on duty," Ramirez said, watching his new co-workers with careful, hungry eyes. That night, as the others slept, Ranger Ramirez, or what looked like him, stood in front of the bathroom mirror. For just a moment, his reflection slipped, showing something else underneath the borrowed face. He practiced his smile again, getting it a little better this time. Outside his window, the first snowflakes of an early winter began to fall. "My name is Rebecca Powell. I've been the senior park ranger at Olympic National Park for almost 7 years now. I love the forest, the mountains, the smell of pine in the morning, and the peaceful quiet that surrounds everything. At least, it used to be peaceful. It all started on a Tuesday morning in the middle of July. I was fast asleep in my cabin when my radio crackled to life, startling me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, knocking over my glass of water in the process. "Powell, you there? Over." It was Jensen, one of the junior rangers who often took the night shift. "Yeah, I'm here," I mumbled, still half asleep. "What's going on?" "We've got reports of some strange animal remains near Deadfall Creek. Hikers called it in late last night. Thought you'd want to check it out first thing." I glanced at my alarm. Clock, 5:43 a.m. So much for sleeping in. "I'll head out there in 20. Send me the coordinates." After a quick shower and even quicker breakfast, I grabbed my gear and whistled for Rex, my German shepherd. He'd been with me on every investigation for the past 4 years, and his nose was better than any piece of equipment we had. The drive to Deadfall Creek took about 40 minutes. As I got close, I noticed something strange. A thick mist hung over the ground, clinging to the trees and bushes like it was alive. It wasn't unusual to see some morning fog in the park, but this was different, denser, almost like it was watching me. "Come on, Rex," I said as I parked the truck and grabbed my backpack. The elk carcass wasn't hard to find. The smell hit us first, that sickly sweet odor of meat starting to go bad. Rex whined a little, which was unusual. He'd been around dead animals before. What I saw made my stomach turn. The elk had been torn apart, but not like a normal predator kill. Normal predators don't leave teeth marks that look human. I knelt down to examine the bones more closely, taking photos with my digital camera. The bite patterns were all wrong, too precise, too deliberate, and it was cold, really cold. I checked my thermometer, 38 degrees, in mid-July. That wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. As I stood up, I noticed frost on the leaves around the creek. Actual frost. In summer, I was so focused on the strange cold that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching until they were right behind me. "You shouldn't be here, Ranger Powell." I spun around, hand instinctively going to my sidearm. An older man with deep lines in his face and long gray hair tied back in a braid stood watching me. Joseph Walking Bear. He lived in the nearby reservation and occasionally helped with search and rescue operations. "Joseph, you scared me half to death." "These woods aren't safe right now," he said, looking around nervously. "The winter spirits are hungry." I'd always respected Joseph, but I also knew he was full of stories and superstitions. "I'm just investigating some unusual animal deaths." "Those aren't animal deaths," he said, pointing to the elk. "That's a warning. The hunger has awakened in the ancient forest. It will seek those who venture too deep." I appreciate your concern. But I have to look into this, I said, trying to be respectful. Have you seen any hikers around here recently? Joseph shook his head. I stay away from Deadfall Creek this time of year. You should too. After Joseph left, I continued my search of the area. About 100 yards from the elk carcass, I found something that made my blood run cold. A backpack torn to shreds. The name tag was still attached. Thomas Gardner. There was blood on the fabric, dried and brown. Rex track, I commanded, holding the backpack for him to sniff. Rex usually loved tracking. He was trained for it, and he was good at it. But this... Time! He backed away from the backpack, his tail between his legs. When I tried to lead him toward the creek, where the scent trail seemed to lead, he planted his feet and whined loudly, refusing to move. I'd never seen him act like that before. Back at Ranger headquarters, I pulled Gardner's hiking permit. Solo, hiker, experienced, had a 5-day backcountry permit that should have ended 3 days ago. No sign-out, no contact with family. This was now officially a missing persons case. I assembled a team of 5 rangers, Wilson, Martinez, Brooks, Thompson, and myself. We'd head out at first light tomorrow, properly equipped for several days of searching. I didn't tell them about the human-like teeth marks or Joseph's warning. Just said we had a missing hiker and some unusual animal activity. That night in my cabin, I had the worst nightmare of my life. I dreamed I was in my tent, surrounded by tall, thin figures standing just outside. I couldn't see them clearly through the tent fabric, just their silhouettes, impossibly tall and skinny. And they were whispering my name, over and over, in a voice that sounded exactly like Thomas Gardner's. I'd never even met the man, but somehow I knew it was his voice. I woke up covered in sweat, my heart racing. It took me an hour to fall back asleep. The next morning we set out early. The mist was even thicker than before, and the temperature had dropped another few degrees. Nobody else seemed to notice how strange that was for July. By midday, we'd reached the area where I'd found Gardner's backpack. We split up to search, keeping in radio contact. Just before sunset, Wilson radioed in. "Powell, you need to see this. I found some kind of old cabin, about half a mile northeast of the creek." We regrouped and headed to Wilson's location. The cabin looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The wood was gray with age, and the roof sagged in the middle. But what caught my attention were the strange symbols carved into the doorframe and walls. Circles with lines through them, strange stick figures and patterns I'd never seen before. "What do you think those mean?" Martinez asked, running, his fingers over the carvings. "No idea," I replied, "but let's check inside. Maybe Gardner took shelter here." I pushed open the creaking door, and we stepped into the darkness of the cabin, not knowing that we were walking straight into a nightmare that had been waiting for us for a very long time. The inside of the cabin was dusty and cold. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing a small table, a broken chair, and a rusty wood stove in the corner. The air smelled old and damp, like wet leaves that had been sitting too long. "Look at this," Thompson said, pointing his light at a small desk pushed against the wall. On top of it was a leather-bound journal. I picked it up carefully and read the name written on the first page. Thomas Gardner. "It's his," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's see what happened to him." We gathered around as I flipped through the pages. The first few entries were normal enough. Gardner describing the trails he'd hiked, some deer he'd spotted, how peaceful the forest was. But around the 5th day, things started to change. Day 5, it's getting colder at night, much colder than it should be in July. Saw something strange by the creek today. Movement in the trees that didn't look like an animal. Too tall, too thin. Day 7, haven't been able to catch any fish. Feel like I'm being watched all the time. So hungry. Day 8, found a rabbit in a trap I set. Couldn't wait to cook it. Ate it raw. Never tasted anything so good. I looked up at my team. Their faces showed the same worry I was feeling. Day 10. The hunger won't stop. Caught another rabbit today. The blood was warm. I need more. The final entry was just 3 days ago. The handwriting was shaky, like Gardner's hand had been trembling when he wrote it. Don't know what day it is anymore. Saw something by the creek. Pale and skinny, like a person but not a person. So tall. It smiled at me. I'm so hungry, nothing fills me up. Need meat, fresh meat. Hunger never stops now. This isn't good, Brooks said, stating the obvious. No, it's not, I agreed. But at least we know Gardner was here. Let's set up camp nearby and continue the search tomorrow. We found a small clearing about 50 yards from the cabin and set up our tents. After a quick meal of freeze-dried stew, we sat around the campfire, talking about the search plan for tomorrow. I noticed Martinez barely touched his food. He just stared at it, then looked around at the rest of us with an odd expression on his face. Not hungry, Martinez? I asked. No, he said quietly. I mean, yes, I'm hungry, but not for this. Then he seemed to catch himself. Sorry, just tired, I guess. We assigned night watch shifts, 2 hours each. Wilson took the first shift, while the rest of us tried to get some sleep. I was almost dozing off when Wilson woke me up, his face pale in the beam of his flashlight. Powell, you need to hear this. His voice was shaking. What is it? I heard children laughing in the woods. I thought I was imagining it at first, but it was clear as day. Sounded like they were playing hide and seek or something. I sat up quickly. There are no children registered in the park right now. I know. That's why I woke you. I got up and grabbed my jacket. It was freezing outside the tent, my breath, making white clouds in the air. The temperature reading on my watch said 28 degrees in July. Show me where you heard it, I said. Wilson pointed toward a dense section of trees. Over there, but it stopped a few minutes ago. We stood listening for a while, but heard nothing except the normal night sounds of the forest. Finally, I told Wilson to get some sleep and took over the watch. As I sat by the dying campfire, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from just beyond the circle of light. The temperature kept dropping. By the time my shift ended and I woke Martinez for his turn, frost was forming on the grass around our tents. The next morning, I woke to Thompson shaking my tent. Powell, Martinez is gone. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag. What do you mean, gone? He wasn't here when I woke up from my shift. His sleeping bag is empty. We searched the immediate area and found Martinez's flashlight lying on the ground, about 20 yards from camp. Next to it was a trail of bare footprints leading deeper into the forest. Bare footprints, even though it was freezing cold and the ground was covered in frost. Why would he take off his boots? Brooks wondered aloud. I don't know, I said, but we need to find him and Gardner. We followed the footprints for almost an hour. They led us through dense underbrush, over fallen logs, and finally to a small clearing. What we found there made my stomach turn. In the center of the clearing was some kind of structure made of bones. Animal bones mostly, deer, elk, maybe some smaller creatures, all tied together with what looked like dried sinew. But as we got closer, I realized with horror that not all the bones were from animals. Inside the bone structure were human remains, partial remains. A leg here, part of a rib cage there, and a belt with a distinctive copper buckle I recognized from the photo of Thomas Gardner in his hiking permit. Oh God, Wilson said, turning away to throw up in the bushes. I keyed my radio to call for backup, but instead of the normal static, the speaker emitted a wet, sloppy sound, like someone chewing and swallowing right next to my ear. I dropped the radio in shock. What the hell is going on here? Thompson asked, his voice cracking with fear. Before I could answer, Wilson started screaming from where he'd wandered a few yards away. We ran to him and found him on his knees, shaking. Something was on top of me, he gasped. I couldn't see it clearly. It was sitting on my chest, trying to push raw meat into my mouth. I looked around, but saw nothing. There's nothing here, Wilson. It was here. I swear it was here. As we helped Wilson back to his feet, I noticed something strange about the forest. It was completely silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, not even insects buzzing. And then I realized why. All the animals were leaving. Through the trees I could see them. Deer, rabbits, even a bear, all moving in the same direction, away from where we were standing. It was like they knew something we didn't. We decided to head back to the cabin. We needed shelter, and I wanted to look more closely at Gardner's journal for any clues about what was happening. As we walked, Brooks pointed out something I hadn't noticed before. Scattered throughout the forest were old newspaper clippings, weathered and yellowed, pinned to trees with rusty nails. I stopped to read one. 5 hikers missing in Olympic Forest. July 1879, unusual cold spell continues as search parties find no trace of missing persons. Another one, from 1923, 3. Loggers vanish near Deadfall Creek. Workers report hearing children's laughter before disappearances. And the most recent, from 1976. Park ranger lost during investigation. Colleague reports strange behavior before disappearance, all during unusually cold summer periods. All in this same area. We made it back to the cabin just as the sun was starting to set, and that's when we saw him, Martinez, walking slowly toward us from the direction of our abandoned campsite. He looked terrible. His skin was pale, almost gray, and he seemed thinner than he'd been just yesterday. His clothes hung loosely on his frame. "Martinez," I called out. "Where have you been? We've been looking everywhere for you." "Got lost," he said, his voice raspy and strange. "Wandered around all night, found my way back." As he got closer, I noticed something wrong with his eyes. The edges had turned milky white, and when he smiled at us, his teeth looked different, sharper. "Are you okay?" I asked, taking a step back. "You don't look well." "I'm fine," he said, "just hungry." That night, none of us felt safe sleeping outside anymore. We decided to stay in the cabin, taking turns to keep watch. I volunteered for the first shift, while the others tried to get some rest. Martinez had been acting strange all evening. He kept staring at us when he thought we weren't looking, and the way he looked at us, it wasn't normal. It was like he was sizing us up, the way a hungry person might look at a hamburger. I checked our food supplies while the others were settling in. Someone had been through our packs. All our beef jerky and dried meat was gone. When I asked about it, Martinez just shrugged and looked away. Around midnight, I noticed something odd about our raw bacon. It was the only food not spoiled, even though everything else, our fruits, bread, even the canned beans, had somehow rotted overnight despite the freezing temperatures. And later, when I got up to stretch my legs, I caught Martinez sneaking the raw bacon into his mouth, eating it like it was candy. As the night went on, the temperature kept dropping. My watch showed 15 degrees below zero, impossible for this time of year. Frost patterns spread across the cabin windows, and I swear they looked like skeleton hands reaching inward. I took out Gardner's journal again and read through it more carefully. There was one word that kept appearing in the later entries: Wendigo. I had no idea what it meant, but Gardner had underlined it several times on the last page. When Brooks took over the watch at 2 a.m., he complained about stomach pains. "I'm so hungry," he said, rubbing his belly. "I just ate an hour ago, but it feels like I haven't eaten in days." I noticed his eyes looked bloodshot, and his movements were jerky and aggressive. He reminded me of how Martinez had been acting. "Earlier, try to drink some water," I suggested, handing him my canteen. "Maybe it'll help." He gulped it down, but then made a face. "Doesn't help, need food, real food." I pretended to go to sleep, but I kept one eye open, watching Brooks. Around 3 a.m., I saw him get up and go outside. I waited a few minutes, then followed him. The night was pitch black and bitterly cold. I followed Brooks's footprints in the fresh frost, leading around to the back of the cabin. When I turned the corner, I almost screamed. Martinez was there, crouched down, arranging something on the ground. When I shined my flashlight on it, I saw human body parts. A hand, part of a leg, and other pieces I couldn't identify. Some had been partially eaten. Martinez, what the hell are you doing? He turned to look at me, and in the beam of my flashlight, his face looked hardly human anymore. His cheeks were sunken in, his skin stretched tight over his skull, and his eyes were completely milky white now. Powell, he said, but his voice wasn't his anymore. It was raspy and deep, like something was using his mouth to speak. The hunger never ends once it begins. You'll see. What happened to you? I asked, backing away slowly. What's a Wendigo? A horrible grin spread across his face, revealing teeth that had definitely grown sharper. I am becoming. The hunger walks in me now. I ran back into the cabin and woke Thompson and Wilson. Something's wrong with Martinez. Really wrong. What do you mean? Thompson asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Before I could answer, a scream came from outside. Brooks. We grabbed our flashlights and guns and rushed out. Brooks was on his knees in the clearing, his back arched in pain. In the crossing beams of our flashlights, I saw him changing right before our eyes. His arms and legs were getting longer, stretching like taffy. His skin was pulling tight across his bones, and from his head, something was growing. Two thin, branch-like things that looked horribly like antlers. "Get back to the cabin!" I yelled to Thompson and Wilson. "Now!" We ran back inside and barricaded the door with the table and broken chair. Outside, Brooks had stopped screaming. The silence was somehow worse. "What's happening?" Wilson asked, his voice shaking. "What's wrong with them?" I swallowed hard. "I think they're turning into something called a Wendigo." "A what?" "I don't know exactly. Gardner wrote about it in his journal." A scratching sound came from the roof, then another from the window, then the door. They were surrounding us. "What do they want?" Thompson whispered. A voice came from outside, Martinez's voice, but wrong somehow, like he was speaking through water. "We're hungry, Powell, so hungry, let us in." Then another voice joined in, Brooks this time. "Just a bite, just a small bite, the hunger hurts so much." I could see Thompson breaking. His eyes were wide with fear, and he was shaking all over. "Maybe we should let them in," he said. "Maybe they just need help." "That's not them anymore," I said firmly. "Whatever they are now, they're not our friends." We spent that night huddled in the cabin, listening to them circle around us, calling our names, sometimes in their own voices, sometimes in voices that sounded like our family members. Around dawn, Wilson set up one of our trail cameras near a window. Maybe we could get a better look at what we were dealing with. When we checked the camera a few hours later, what we saw made my blood freeze. The pictures showed an emaciated, impossibly tall figure moving between the trees. Its skin was pale and papery, stretched so tight over its bones that I could see each rib clearly. But worst of all was the face. Sunken eyes, a mouth full of needle-like teeth, and small antlers sprouting from its head. "That can't be Martinez," Wilson whispered. "He wasn't that tall." "I don't think that is Martinez," I said. "I think that's the original one." As the day went on, I searched the cabin for anything that might help us. Under a loose floorboard, I found a small box full of old letters. One of them, dated 1879, described winter spirits that hunger and hunt in the shape of men. It mentioned the indigenous people believed these creatures were once human, but were possessed by an evil spirit after committing the sin of eating human flesh. "How do we kill them?" Thompson asked, looking over my shoulder at the letters. "It doesn't say," I admitted, "but there has to be a way." Just before sunset, we heard a horrible sound, wood splintering, and then Thompson screaming. I turned just in time to see a long spear-like arm punching through the wall of the cabin. It had impaled Thompson right through his chest, lifting him off the ground. The arm pulled back, taking Thompson with it through the hole in the wall. His screams cut off suddenly, replaced by wet tearing sounds and crunching. Wilson vomited in the corner. I just stood there, frozen in horror, listening to the things outside feeding on our friend. Wilson and I stood in shocked silence after losing Thompson. The wet sounds of feeding outside eventually stopped, and an eerie quiet fell over the cabin. "We need to find a way out of here," Wilson whispered, his face pale and sweaty. "We can't stay." "We can't leave either," I said, pointing to the window. "Look." Outside, 3 figures stood in the moonlight. 2 were clearly Martinez and Brooks, or what used to be them. Their bodies had changed completely now. Their arms and legs were much too long, their skin pulled tight over their bones like plastic wrap. Their fingers had grown into long claws, and small antlers poked out from their skulls. But the 3rd figure was different, taller than the others, almost 8 feet high, and so thin it looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it. Its antlers were fully grown, branching out above its head like a crown. This had to be the original Wendigo, the one that had started changing the others. "What do we do?" Wilson asked, his voice cracking. I thought about Joseph Walking Bear's warning, the symbols carved into the cabin door and walls. There had to be a reason this cabin was here, in this spot. It had to be important somehow. "I think the symbols are protection," I said, running my fingers over the strange carvings. "Maybe that's why they haven't just broken in yet." As if hearing my words, Martinez, the Wendigo that used to be Martinez, pressed his face against the window. His milky white eyes stared at us, and when he spoke, his jaw opened far wider than a human jaw should be able to open. "The symbols only work for so long, Powell," he hissed. "We're getting stronger, hungrier." I pulled Wilson away from the window. "We need to figure out how to fight them." We searched the cabin more thoroughly, tearing up floorboards, checking behind loose wall panels. Behind the rotting wallpaper in a corner, we found old cave paintings. They showed stick figures fighting tall, thin creatures with antlers. In one picture, a human was cutting open the chest of one of the creatures. In the next, they were burning something small they'd taken from inside it. "The heart," I whispered. "We need to burn their hearts?" A loud thump came from the roof, then another and another. They were trying to break in from above. I grabbed Gardner's journal again and flipped to the last few pages. There was a crude drawing of what looked like a Wendigo with an X marked over its chest. "Wilson, help me make some kind of weapon," I said, looking around the cabin. "Something sharp we can use to cut them open." Wilson looked like he might be sick again, but he nodded. We broke apart an old metal bed frame in the corner, using rocks to sharpen the ends of the metal. Poles. The thumping on the roof got louder. Dust and splinters rained down on us. They were breaking through. "We need fire too," I said, gathering old papers and the few pieces of dry wood we could find. "Wait," Wilson said suddenly. "Look at Brooks." I peered out a small gap in the barricaded window. Brooks, the Wendigo that was Brooks, was pawing at his eyes, keeping to the shadows. When a moonbeam crossed his path, he hissed and backed away. They don't like light, I realized. The flare gun. I have a flare gun in my pack. I dug through my backpack and found the flare gun with 3 flares. Not much, but better than nothing. Just then, a section of the roof gave way. A long, skeletal arm reached through the hole, feeling around blindly. "Get back!" I shouted, pushing Wilson toward the far wall. The arm withdrew, and then a face appeared in the hole. The original Wendigo, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, its mouth full of needle-like teeth. "We just want to feed," it said in a voice that sounded like ice cracking. "The hunger never ends. Join us, and you won't have to fight anymore." Wilson whimpered beside me. "Powell, I'm so hungry," he whispered. "I didn't want to tell you, but I'm starving." I looked at him sharply. "Did you eat anything Martinez gave you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Just a little bit of jerky. He offered it last night." I was so hungry. My heart sank. He was already infected. It would only be a matter of time before. He started changing too. The roof cracked again, a bigger piece falling in this time. I could see the original Wendigo clearly now, its jaws unhinging like a snake's as it prepared to drop into the cabin. "Wilson, stand back," I said, raising the flare gun. I fired directly at the creature's face. The flare hit it between the eyes, and it let out a horrible scream, a sound like wind howling through a frozen forest. It jerked back from the hole, clawing at its burning face. For a moment we had a reprieve, but I knew it wouldn't last long. "Wilson, how are you feeling?" I asked, watching him carefully. He was sweating heavily now, his eyes starting to look bloodshot. "Not good," he admitted. "My stomach hurts so bad, Powell, and my fingers, they feel wrong." I looked down at his hands. His fingers did look longer. Than normal, the joints knobby and stretched. "Fight it, Wilson," I said. "Don't give in to the hunger." He nodded, but I could see the pain in his eyes. It was already too late. I quickly made Molotov cocktails from the cabin's old alcohol supply, some whiskey bottles that had been left behind years ago. I tore strips from my shirt to use as wicks. Outside, the Wendigos were getting more aggressive. Martinez had started tearing at the barricaded door with his claws, while Brooks was trying to widen the hole in the roof. The temperature had dropped to -30 degrees now. My breath came out in thick white clouds, and ice was forming on the inside walls of the cabin. Wilson was getting worse by the minute. His skin was turning pale, and he kept grinding his teeth, which looked sharper every time he opened his mouth. "Powell," he groaned, doubling over in pain. "I can't. I can smell your blood. It's making me so hungry." I backed away from him, raising the flare gun. "Wilson, don't do this. Fight it." "I'm trying," he gasped, "but it hurts so much." His fingers were definitely longer now, the nails hardening into claws. His back hunched as if his spine was changing shape. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and fired another flare. The light hit Wilson in the chest, not hard enough to seriously hurt him, but enough to drive him back. He screamed and covered his eyes, scrambling into the darkest corner of the cabin. Just then, the door burst open, the barricade giving way under Martinez's inhuman strength. The transformed ranger stood in the doorway, his body impossibly thin, his head almost touching the top of the door frame, even though he was hunched over. "Time to feed," he hissed and lunged toward me. I dodged to the side, grabbing one of the sharpened metal poles. As Martinez turned to come at me again, I thrust the makeshift spear forward with all my strength, driving it into his chest. Martinez let out a sound that was half scream, half laugh. He looked down at the metal pole sticking out of his chest, then back at me, his milky eyes widening. "That won't kill me," he said. "Nothing will except burning your heart," I finished, lighting one of the Molotov cocktails. For the first time, I saw real fear in the Wendigo's eyes. Before I could throw the Molotov cocktail, something huge crashed through the roof. The original Wendigo dropped into the cabin, landing on all fours like some kind of spider. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its skin so tight, I could see every bone in its body, its face barely human anymore. Martinez used the distraction to pull the metal pole from his chest. Black blood oozed from the wound, and inside I could see something moving, his heart still beating even though it should have been destroyed by the pole. "Wilson!" I shouted to my changing friend. "Help me!" But Wilson was too far gone. He was curled in the corner, his body shaking as the transformation took hold. His fingers had stretched into claws, and his teeth were falling out, replaced by sharp fangs. I was alone against 3 Wendigos. The original one spoke, its voice making the air turn to ice crystals around us. "You cannot win, Ranger Powell. The hunger always wins." It raised one long, bony arm, and suddenly the cabin filled with howling wind and snow, an impossible blizzard inside the small room. I could barely see through the swirling white. I backed up against the wall, clutching my last flare and the Molotov cocktail. "Think, Rebecca, think!" Martinez lunged at me through the snow. I dropped to the floor, and he crashed into the wall instead. As he turned, I aimed the flare gun at his chest wound and fired my last flare. The flare lodged in the hole, illuminating him from within. Martinez screamed, his body jerking wildly. In the red glow of the flare, I could see his heart clearly, black and twisted, still beating outside the confines of normal biology. I threw the Molotov cocktail. The bottle shattered against his chest, and flames engulfed his upper body. Martinez's scream became something inhuman as the fire reached his exposed heart. The original Wendigo howled in rage and charged at me. I grabbed another sharpened pole and held it out like a spear, but the creature was fast, too fast. It knocked the pole aside and grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground. Its face was inches from mine, jaws opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. The smell of its breath was like rotting meat. "You will join us," it hissed. "The hunger will walk in you too." Behind the Wendigo, I saw Wilson struggling to his feet. He was caught between human and monster, his body partly transformed, his eyes cloudy, but not completely white yet. "Wilson," I gasped, struggling to breathe. "The axe." There was an old fire axe mounted on the wall. I'd noticed it earlier, but hadn't had time to grab it. Wilson looked at the axe, then at me. I could see the war happening behind his eyes, the human fighting against the hunger. "Please!" I wheezed as the Wendigo's grip tightened. With a cry that was half human, half monster, Wilson lunged for the axe. He swung it wildly, burying it in the original Wendigo's back. The creature dropped me and spun around, faster than anything should be able to move. It grabbed Wilson by the shoulders and bit into his neck. Wilson's scream turned to gurgling as blood poured down his chest. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the axe that had fallen to the floor. With all my strength, I swung it at the back of the Wendigo's neck. The blade bit deep. The creature released Wilson and turned to me, black blood pouring from the wound. It was still moving, still coming for me. I swung again, aiming for its chest. This time, the axe sank in with a crack of breaking ribs. I pulled it out and swung again and again, until I'd opened a hole in its chest cavity. Inside was a heart unlike anything I'd ever seen. Black and twisted like Martinez's, but larger, pulsing with unnatural life. It didn't look human. It didn't look like it belonged in this world at all. The Wendigo reached for me, its movement slowing as more black blood poured from its wounds. I stumbled back, looking for anything to use as a flame. Martinez's burning body had set part of the cabin wall on fire. I grabbed a flaming piece of wood and thrust it into the hole in the Wendigo's chest. The heart caught fire instantly. The Wendigo let out a scream that shook the entire cabin, a sound of pure agony that seemed to come from somewhere else, somewhere ancient and cold. Its body began to burn from the inside out, the flames spreading along its bones like they were made of paper. In seconds it was engulfed, collapsing to the floor in a burning heap. I turned to check on Wilson. He was lying on the floor, blood pooling around him from the bite in his neck. But his eyes were human again, the cloudy whiteness receding. "Powell," he whispered, "did we win?" "Yeah," I said, kneeling beside him. "We won." "I'm cold," he said. "So cold." I held his hand as the light faded from his eyes. Wilson was gone. A sound behind me made me turn. Brooks, the Wendigo that had been Brooks, was crawling in through the broken door. His transformation wasn't as complete as Martinez's had been, but he was barely human anymore. "Still hungry?" he growled, his voice a broken thing. I was exhausted, bleeding from cuts I didn't remember getting. But I raised the axe one more time. "Come on then," I said. Brooks charged at me. I sidestepped at the last second, using his momentum to drive him into the burning wall where Martinez had fallen. As he struggled to free himself from the flames, I swung the axe at his chest again and again until I exposed his blackened heart. The fire spread to him quickly. His screams joined the howling wind as his body burned away to nothing but ash. Finally, it was quiet, except for the crackling of flames. The cabin was burning down around me. I had to get out. I stumbled through the door into the cold night air. The unnatural blizzard was dying down, the temperature already rising a few degrees. Dawn was breaking over the trees. My body felt like one giant bruise as I made my way back toward Ranger headquarters. It took me almost 2 days to reach it, sleeping in the hollow of a tree the first night when I couldn't go any further. By the time I got back, the wound on my arm where Brooks had scratched me during the fight was looking bad. The skin around, it was pale and cold to the touch, with dark veins spreading outward. They took me to the hospital. The doctors said it was an infected animal scratch. They gave me antibiotics and stitched me up. But the antibiotics didn't help. Nothing helped the growing coldness in my veins, the hunger that started as a small ache in my stomach and grew stronger each day. Food started to taste like ashes in my mouth. I couldn't keep anything down. The doctors were baffled. They ran test after test, but found nothing they could explain. I knew what was happening. The Wendigo's curse was spreading through me, just as it had spread through Martinez and Brooks and Gardner before them. I requested assignment to the most isolated, fire watchtower in the park, told them I needed time alone after losing my team. They understood, or thought they did. That was 3 weeks ago. The hunger gets worse every day. My teeth have started falling out, replaced by sharper ones. My fingers ache as the bones slowly stretch and change. I've stockpiled enough supplies to last a normal person months, but I'm not normal anymore. The hunger is for something else now. Something alive. Last night I caught myself staring at a family of deer through my binoculars, not as wildlife to protect, but as food. I found myself wondering what they would taste like raw, with the blood still warm. I've barricaded the tower, door and windows, with the symbols I memorized from the cabin. I don't know if they'll hold the hunger in, but I have to try. If you're reading this, stay away from Deadfall Creek. Stay away from the Olympic National Park during cold spells in summer. And if you ever feel a hunger that nothing seems to satisfy, a hunger that feels like it's eating you from the inside out, then remember my story. Because the hunger walks. It has always walked these woods. And now it walks in me. My name is Rebecca Powell, and I am becoming.